Hello guys, welcome to Watch Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Wednesday Addams found Harry at age 5 and taught him 37 ways to torture Dumbledore? Dark humor. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Cupboard. The Addams family did not take vacations the way normal families did. Normal families went to beaches with white sand and clear water and came back with sunburns and souvenir keychains. The Addams family went to places where the ground was soft for interesting reasons, where the architecture suggested previous occupants had met with misfortune, and where the locals crossed the street when they saw them coming. They considered this restful. Surrey had not been Gomez's first choice. He'd had his heart set on Transylvania, but Morticia had read somewhere that a particular cemetery in Little Whinging contained the remains of a 16th-century plague doctor whose burial rites had been improperly conducted, and Morticia had very strong opinions about improper burial rites. So Surrey it was. They'd rented a car that Gomez drove with characteristic enthusiasm, which is to say, other drivers pulled over and wept, and they'd taken a room at a bed and breakfast whose owner had taken one look at the family and quietly begun updating her will. Wednesday sat in the back seat between Pugsley and a small cage containing their traveling spider, Aristotle, and she watched Surrey pass outside the window with the expression of someone attending a funeral where they didn't particularly like the deceased. Everything was so clean. The hedges were trimmed. The lawns were mowed. Each house was essentially identical to the last, a row of beige certainties lining a street called Privet Drive, and the whole neighborhood had the aggressively cheerful quality of somewhere deeply committed to pretending nothing was wrong. Wednesday found places like this far more disturbing than graveyards. "It's so normal," Pugsley said, pressing his face to the glass with the delighted horror of a tourist at a zoo exhibit. "Don't say that word," Wednesday said. "What, normal? It gives me a headache." Gomez pulled the car to a stop outside number 4, which looked exactly like numbers 2, 3, 5, and 6, except that the garden gnome by the front path had been positioned facing outward with its arms slightly raised, as if warding something off. Wednesday noticed this detail with mild interest. Someone in that house was afraid of something they couldn't name. That, at least, was honest. They were not staying at number 4. They were parked in front of it because Gomez had, with complete sincerity, gotten them lost looking for the cemetery and had consulted the map upside down for approximately 20 minutes before Morticia gently corrected him. She did this with such grace that Gomez kissed her hand and declared her a genius, and they sat in front of number 4 while Gomez reoriented himself, and that was when Wednesday got out of the car. "Wednesday," Morticia said, not looking up from her book. "I'll be a moment. We're not stopping." "I know." Wednesday was already on the pavement. She hadn't been able to say, afterward, what drew her to the house. She had a sense for things. Her grandmother called it the old sight, her father called it instinct, her mother called it a gift and left it at that. What Wednesday called it was noticing. She noticed things other people didn't, or wouldn't, or had trained themselves very carefully not to. She noticed the way the curtains in number 4 shifted despite there being no wind. She noticed the garden gnome was not positioned to ward something out but to watch something in. She noticed that the house, for all its aggressive normality, had one window on the ground floor that was smaller than it should be, too small for a room, too large for a cupboard, and set so low to the ground that whatever space it belonged to was underneath the stairs. She walked up the garden path. She was 5 years old. She was wearing her standard black dress with white collar, her hair in its 2 perfect plaits, and she carried herself with the composure of someone 3 times her age who had attended 4 times as many funerals. The garden gnome watched her pass. She ignored it. The front door was painted red, which Wednesday thought was trying too hard. She did not knock on the front door. She went around the side of the house instead, following the line of the foundation, until she found the low window she'd spotted from the street. She crouched in front of it. The glass was grimy on the outside, but through it, in the thin afternoon light that managed to squeeze in from somewhere above, she could see a very small space. A cot with a thin mattress that had a spring coming through it. A single blanket, grayish, balled in the corner. A collection of, she leaned closer, toy soldiers, meticulously arranged in a battle formation, their general position suggesting they were defending a pile of broken crayons with the seriousness of an actual military campaign. And sitting in the middle of all this, cross-legged on the cot, wearing a shirt 3 sizes too large and trousers that were essentially a second shirt, was a boy. He was small. Smaller than he should have been, Wednesday thought clinically, for someone who appeared to be around her age. His hair was a disaster, black and wild and going in directions that hair did not typically go, and he wore a pair of enormous glasses held together at the bridge with a piece of tape. He was thin in the way that suggested he didn't get enough to eat and had been that way long enough that his body had stopped expecting differently. He was also talking to a spider. Not the way children sometimes talk to animals, with the baby voice and the projected emotions. He was having what appeared to be a genuine, considered conversation, with long pauses on his end that suggested he was actually listening to the spider's responses. The spider, quite a nice garden spider, Wednesday noted approvingly, fat and well-marked, was sitting on his knee and doing absolutely nothing a spider would normally do in proximity to a human child. It wasn't running. It wasn't retreating. It was, if anything, oriented toward him. Wednesday pressed her hand against the glass. The boy's head came up. He saw her. He didn't flinch, didn't scramble backward, didn't make the noise children made when frightened. He looked at her with a pair of very green eyes behind the enormous glasses, and his expression was the expression of someone who was so accustomed to the world being unkind that they had simply stopped anticipating it being otherwise. There was no hope in that face. There was just endurance, which in Wednesday's assessment was worse. She held up a hand. 5 fingers. Then she pointed at the small window latch she could see inside. He stared at her for a moment. Then, with the deliberate care of someone who had learned to move quietly, he climbed off the cot and unlatched the window. It swung open. The smell that came out was of dust and old carpet and something faintly chemical, cleaning products, Wednesday identified. The sort of smell that meant someone had been made to clean things. "Hello," she said. "Hello," he said. His voice was quiet and slightly hoarse, like he didn't use it much. "How long have you been in there?" He thought about it with complete seriousness. "Since Tuesday. I broke a dish." Wednesday regarded him. "That's not why you're in there." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "Not really." "What's your name?" "Harry." A pause. "Harry Potter." "I'm Wednesday Addams." She studied him with the frank assessment of a scientist examining a new specimen, not unkindly, just precisely. "That spider isn't afraid of you." Harry glanced at the spider on his knee. "Gerald isn't afraid of anything. I told him about Aunt Petunia and he said she sounded boring." "You speak to spiders." "They listen," Harry said, as if this were the most reasonable thing, and then added, very carefully, "Is that strange?" "I had a spider called Aristotle," Wednesday said. "I taught him to play dead. He was very committed to the performance." She paused. "How old are you?" 5. "I'm also 5. She appeared to consider this significant. "The people in the house. Are they your family?" Something moved across his face, not quite pain, more like the particular weariness of someone asked to explain a complicated and unpleasant truth. "My aunt and uncle. My parents died." "How?" Most people, asking the question, would have softened it or apologized for asking. Wednesday asked it the way you'd ask for the time, plainly, because she wanted the information. Something in Harry's face shifted. Not toward sadness. Toward something more careful. "They say a car crash," he said. "Do you believe them?" A very long pause. Gerald the spider walked in a small circle on Harry's knee. "No," Harry said. Wednesday nodded. She stood up from her crouch and looked back at the street where the rented car sat, and then looked back at Harry in his cupboard with his tin soldiers and his spider. She was 5 years old and she had not yet developed the ability to strategize over long time horizons, but she was also 5 years old in the way that Wednesday Addams was 5 years old, which meant she had already identified 3 things simultaneously. This boy was interesting, what was being done to him was wrong, and whoever was doing it was going to be very sorry. "Come out," she said. Harry looked at the window. It was not a large window. "I'm not supposed to leave." "I didn't ask what you were supposed to do." Another long pause. Then, with the careful thoughtfulness of someone making a calculation, Harry folded himself through the window. He was thin enough to manage it, which said something that Wednesday filed away without comment. He stood on the grass outside number 4, blinking in the afternoon light as if he'd been in that cupboard much longer than since Tuesday, and he was shorter than Wednesday had estimated, barely up to her shoulder, and when he stood straight she could count the way his shirt hung on his collarbones. "There," Wednesday said. Harry stood on the grass and looked at the street and then at Wednesday and seemed to be waiting for something bad to happen. When it didn't, he looked faintly confused. "My family is in that car," Wednesday said, pointing. Harry looked at the Addams family's rented Volvo, which currently had Gomez hanging out the driver's window gesturing at a map with both hands while Morticia read, and Pugsley in the back seat attempting to feed a piece of his sandwich to Aristotle through the cage bars. "Okay," Harry said, neutrally. "My father will want to know your story," Wednesday said. "He cries at interesting stories." "That isn't weakness, he just has a great deal of passion." "Okay," Harry said again. "My mother will look at you like this." Wednesday arranged her face into Morticia's particular expression of serene appraisal, the one that made delivery men back slowly away. "That means she's deciding if she likes you." "She will like you." "How do you know?" "Because you're not afraid of me," Wednesday said simply. Harry looked at her. "Should I be?" "Most children are." Harry considered the spider still sitting patiently on his knee. Then he looked at Wednesday with those steady green eyes. "Gerald says you smell like someone who knows where things are buried." Wednesday felt something she experienced very rarely, the specific warmth of being correctly perceived. "Gerald," she said, "is an excellent judge of character." She turned and walked down the garden path, and Harry, after a moment, followed her. The garden gnome watched them go. Neither of them looked at it. Gomez saw them coming and leaned further out the window with the instincts of a man who had spent his entire life recognizing interesting situations. He took in Wednesday's expression, the one that meant she'd found something, and then he took in the small, thin, enormous-eyed boy trailing behind her, and Gomez Addams, who had dueled rival families at dawn, who had once wrestled an alligator for sport, who laughed at danger with the genuine delight of someone who found it charming, felt something in his chest do a sharp and unexpected thing. He got out of the car. "Papa," Wednesday said, arriving at the car door with Harry one step behind her. "This is Harry Potter. He lives in a cupboard." Gomez looked at the boy. The boy looked at Gomez, all the mustache and pinstripe and enormous vitality of him, and did not step back. "Harry Potter," Gomez said, with great feeling. He placed a hand on his heart. "A cupboard." "Since Tuesday," Wednesday said. "He broke a dish." Gomez made a sound that was not quite a word. His eyes had gone very bright, which meant he was either about to cry or about to do something dramatic. Usually both, in sequence. "Gomez," Morticia said, appearing at the passenger window. She looked at Harry with her long, serene gaze. Harry looked back. Most adults, looked at by Morticia Addams, looked away. Harry held it. Something very faint moved at the corner of Morticia's mouth, not quite a smile, more the expression of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. "He speaks to spiders," Wednesday said. "Does he?" Morticia said. "His spider says I smell like I know where things are buried." "Accurate," Morticia said. They say his parents died in a car crash, Wednesday said, and she said it in the tone that communicated the quotation marks clearly without needing to make them explicit. Something moved through Morticia's face, swift and cold and gone. Did they? He doesn't believe it either. Gomez crouched down to Harry's eye level. He did this with the natural ease of a man who respected whoever he was talking to regardless of their height, and he looked at Harry with the directness of someone who didn't know any other mode. "Can you tell me your story?" he asked. Harry looked at him. Looked at Wednesday. Looked at the car where Pugsley had given up on the spider and was now investigating something in his jacket pocket with great concentration. Looked back at Gomez. "My parents are dead," he said. "My aunt and uncle don't like me. I have to cook breakfast and I'm not allowed to ask questions, and I live in the cupboard because my cousin has 2 rooms and there wasn't anywhere else." He said all of this in the flat, careful tone of someone reciting facts, and then he added, as if it were the only part that genuinely puzzled him, "Sometimes things happen. Around me. When I'm angry or scared. I don't do it on purpose." Gomez stood up. He looked at Morticia. Morticia looked at Gomez. Between them passed the kind of communication that long marriages develop, not words exactly, more the compressed exchange of entire conversations in a glance. Then Gomez burst into tears. They were not sad tears. They were the tears Gomez produced at things he found beautiful or moving or exactly right, and they came with the full-body commitment of a man who had never learned to feel things at half volume. He pressed both hands over his heart and looked at the sky and said something in rapid Spanish that Harry couldn't follow but which had the unmistakable emotional shape of a prayer of gratitude. "He does that," Wednesday said to Harry. "Right," Harry said. "Gomez," Morticia said, with loving patience. Gomez collected himself in approximately 8 seconds, which was impressive. He looked at Harry with reddened eyes and the expression of a man who had made a decision. "Harry Potter," he said, "you are coming with us." Harry stared at him. "Where?" "To find a cemetery," Gomez said. "And then to dinner." And then, he turned to look at number 4 Privet Drive with an expression that had gone very still in a way that was far more dangerous than his usual drama. "We're going to have a conversation with your aunt and uncle." "They won't like that," Harry said. "I'm counting on it," said Gomez. The conversation with Vernon and Petunia Dursley lasted 45 minutes. Wednesday sat in the hallway of number 4, she had not been invited in, but the concept of not being invited somewhere had never particularly applied to Wednesday, and listened to it progress through its stages. It began with Vernon's blustering, passed through Petunia's sharp-voiced anxiety, descended briefly into Gomez's quiet period, which was the most alarming section of the entire thing, and concluded with Morticia saying something in a tone so precisely calibrated to the frequency of genuine menace that even Wednesday felt a small, approving chill. Pugsley sat beside Wednesday eating a biscuit. He'd found the biscuit tin in the kitchen, because Pugsley always found food. "What do you think they're saying now?" he asked. "Mother is explaining the situation," Wednesday said. "What situation?" "That Harry is leaving." Pugsley processed this. "Are we keeping him?" "We're not keeping anyone," Wednesday said. "He's a person." "I know, but are we?" "Yes," Wednesday said. Pugsley nodded and offered Wednesday a biscuit. She declined. Harry was sitting at the bottom of the staircase, which was technically the roof of his cupboard. He had Gerald on his finger. He was listening to the voices from the sitting room with the attentiveness of someone accustomed to monitoring the emotional weather of a house for signs of incoming storms. "Your parents are very loud," he said. "Papa is," Wednesday said. "Mother is loud in a different way. Like how a very quiet fire is louder than a shouting one." Wednesday looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Exactly like that." They heard Vernon's voice rise in a final, sputtering protest, and then they heard the sound of absolute silence, which was Morticia's last word on the matter, and then the door opened and Gomez came out first with his hands in his pockets and his chin up. His eyes were still slightly red, but his expression was the expression of a man who had arrived somewhere he'd intended to arrive. "You have an hour," he told Harry. "Get what you want to bring." Harry looked at the stairs. At the cupboard beneath them. "I don't have much." "That's fine," Gomez said. "My soldiers," Harry said. "And Gerald." "Absolutely." Harry stood up. He looked at Wednesday with the expression of someone who had long since stopped trusting good things and was waiting for this one to dissolve. "Why?" he said. "Because Wednesday finds you interesting," Gomez said simply. "And Wednesday is never wrong about people." Wednesday did not confirm or deny this. She simply turned and walked back toward the front door, because the transaction was complete and she was already thinking about the next thing. Harry watched her go. Then he went to collect his soldiers. He came back with them in a shoebox, 17 tin soldiers and Gerald in a small jam jar with holes punched in the lid, and he stood in the hallway of number 4 Privet Drive and looked at the closed sitting room door behind which Vernon and Petunia Dursley had apparently decided to remain, and he looked at it for a long moment. He didn't look sad. He didn't look relieved. He looked like someone finally putting down something heavy that they'd carried so long they'd forgotten it was heavy at all, and then he turned away from the door and walked out of number 4 Privet Drive without looking back. The door closed behind him. In the car, Morticia opened her book back to her page, and Gomez began to re-examine the map, and Pugsley offered Harry the rest of his biscuits, and Wednesday sat beside him and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. Harry looked out the window as Privet Drive disappeared behind them. Gerald shifted in his jar. "Where do you live?" Harry asked. "America," Wednesday said. "Far?" "Very." A pause. Outside, Surrey continued to be Surrey, trimmed and tidy and absolutely committed to itself. "Your father cried," Harry said. "He does. My uncle never cried." "I know," Wednesday said. "He cried at me," Harry said, with the bewilderment of someone trying to categorize a completely unfamiliar experience. "He cried at the fact of you," Wednesday said. "There's a difference." Harry thought about this for a long moment. Gerald walked in a slow circle in the jar on Harry's knee. Outside the window, Surrey gave way to the outskirts of something else, and the sky above the motorway was a particular shade of late afternoon gray that wasn't quite dark but was definitely thinking about it. He was happy, Harry said. Not a question, exactly. More like someone testing whether a word still meant what they thought it meant. "Yes," Wednesday said. "About me." "Yes." Harry absorbed this. His grip on the shoebox of tin soldiers tightened slightly and then relaxed. "That's strange," he said, but he didn't say it like he minded. The cemetery, when they found it, was everything Morticia had hoped, overgrown with remarkable vegetation, occupied by stones so old the names had worn to shadows, and possessed of that specific quiet that had nothing to do with absence and everything to do with very great presence. Gomez wept happily at 3 of the inscriptions. Pugsley found a beetle he described as magnificent and spent 20 minutes in conversation with it. Morticia stood at the grave of the plague doctor for a long time with her eyes closed and her expression deeply satisfied. Harry walked the paths beside Wednesday and they read the inscriptions aloud to each other in the way most children would have recited favorite books, and at a grave that simply said "Here is someone who knew too much," Harry laughed. It was a small, surprised sound, like someone who'd forgotten they could make it, and Wednesday turned to look at him and the look on his face was the face of someone encountering something they hadn't expected to encounter in their own body. "That one's my favorite," Wednesday said. "Mine too," Harry said, and he sounded surprised about it. That night, at the bed-and breakfast, the proprietress brought up the argument about sleeping arrangements that Gomez resolved by renting every available room in the establishment. Harry was given the room with the window that looked over the back garden, and Wednesday came in at approximately 9 in the evening, sat in the chair by the window, and produced a slim black notebook from somewhere in her dress. "What's that?" Harry asked. He was cross-legged on the bed with his soldiers arranged around him and Gerald's jar on the nightstand. "A journal," Wednesday said. She opened it to the first page and wrote the date at the top in her small, precise handwriting. Then she wrote a title. She turned the journal to show Harry. He read it. His mouth moved slightly. 37 Ways to Torture Dumbledore, he said. "Who's Dumbledore?" "I don't know yet," Wednesday said. "But there will be one." "Why 37? 36 is too few," Wednesday said. 38 is excessive. Harry looked at the title for another moment. "And we're going to find 37 ways?" "You and I," Wednesday said, "are going to find exactly 37 ways. And we are going to use all of them." Harry was quiet for a moment. Gerald moved in his jar. "I don't know anything," Harry said. I don't know who my parents really were or what happened or why things happen around me when I'm angry or, I know," Wednesday said. "We're going to find out all of it." She picked up the pen. "Entry number 1, she said, and wrote it, "Make him expect something ordinary." She turned the journal back to Harry. He read it. "That's it," he said. "It's the foundation," Wednesday said. "Every good strategy begins with making your opponent confident. You let them believe they see exactly what they expect to see." She paused. "What do people expect when they look at you?" Harry thought about it. "Someone small and quiet who doesn't cause trouble." Wednesday's expression did not change, but something in it became very deliberate. "Good," she said. "Let them keep thinking that." She closed the journal and tucked it away. Over the next 3 days in Surrey, because Morticia had found 3 additional graves of interest and Gomez had made friends with a local antiquities dealer who turned out to have Italian ancestry, which launched a 10-hour conversation about fencing, Harry moved with the Addams family through their version of vacation, which was also the most interesting 3 days of his life. Gomez taught him a card game called Abyssinian Roulette that involved bidding on fictional disasters. Harry was naturally excellent at it and won twice, which made Gomez weep with pride. Pugsley showed him the beetle, now named Captain Flint, and explained its taxonomy in impressive detail, and then showed Harry the small chemistry set he carried everywhere and the modifications he'd made to it that were not in any manufacturer's instructions and were almost certainly not legal in several countries. Morticia took him to a second-hand bookshop and let him pick anything he wanted without comment on content or quantity. Harry picked 6 books, including one on the history of poisons that he chose with the instinctive directness of someone who'd been waiting a long time to find it, and Morticia looked at it and then at Harry and said, very quietly, "Good choice." And Wednesday was there in the way that gravity was there. Not constantly visible, not demanding attention, but present in every moment as the organizing principle around which things oriented. She told him things like facts, that the world was wider than Privet Drive, that the people who tried to make you small were afraid of what you'd become, that interesting was better than normal, that being afraid of the dark was a waste of time because the dark was where all the interesting things happened. She also told him, on the last morning, sitting on the bed and breakfast's narrow back step with Gerald's jar between them, "You're a wizard." Harry stared at her. "How do you know?" "The things that happen around you. The way Gerald listens to you. The way you could see me looking through that window when no one else would have noticed." She paused. "There's a world underneath this one. A magical one. Your parents were part of it. Whatever happened to them happened because of it." "How do you know any of this?" Harry said. He wasn't frightened. He was the kind of alert that meant he was cataloging everything. "We have a neighbor," Wednesday said. "In America. He's a wizard. Very old. Smells like cedar and regret. He told me several years ago that the wizarding world isn't secret so much as hidden, which is different, and that someone with the old sight could learn to see it if they looked the right way." She looked at Harry steadily. "I've been looking. But you're not a wizard." "No," Wednesday said. "I'm something else." "That's fine. Harry looked at Gerald. Does that mean I'll go to a school? For magic? Probably, Wednesday said. Eventually. She paused. But not yet. You're 5 years old and you don't know anything yet. And before you go anywhere and do anything, you need to know everything. That'll take forever, Harry said. It'll take years, Wednesday corrected. There's a difference. Harry thought about this. Then, your parents. Are they going to? He stopped. The question had a specific shape, the shape of someone who'd been disappointed enough times to stop finishing the sentence. Wednesday knew what the question was. Yes, she said. They're going to want you to come home with us. Why? Because you're interesting, she said. And because you need a home, and we have a great deal of house. And because Papa has been looking for someone to teach his favorite fencing combination to, and Pugsley needs someone who won't run when things explode, and Mother hasn't had anyone to read to in the evenings. She paused. And because I said so. It was, Harry thought, possibly the most honest and complete answer anyone had ever given to a question he'd asked. He picked up Gerald's jar and held it up to the light and watched the spider turn slowly inside. Gerald says yes, he said. I know, said Wednesday. He told me. On the morning they left Surrey, Gomez drove past Privet Drive one more time. Not for any stated reason. He simply drove down it slowly, and when number 4 appeared on the left, he looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, and then he drove on. None of them looked back. It took 2 more days to sort the paperwork. Gomez's lawyer was reached by phone and appeared, by the speed of his response, to have been waiting for exactly this kind of call his entire career. The Dursleys signed what was put in front of them with the focused desperation of people who'd been thoroughly convinced that cooperation was by far the best available option, and then the door of number 4 closed for the final time and Harry Potter ceased, legally and in every practical sense, to be their problem. He became, instead, the Addams family's. On the flight back, Harry sat between Wednesday and the window and watched England disappear below the clouds. He was small and thin and had a shoebox of soldiers on his lap and wore an oversized jumper that Morticia had bought him, black, naturally, and he watched the clouds with the careful attention of someone taking inventory of a new world. I still don't know anything, he said. That's fine, Wednesday said. We have years. How many years before I go to the magic school? 6, Wednesday said. Approximately. What do we do for 6 years? Wednesday reached into her bag and produced the slim black journal. She handed it to him. He turned it over in his hands, the title on the cover in her small, precise script. 37 Ways to Torture Dumbledore. He'd already forgotten who Dumbledore was supposed to be. The answer was, whoever built the cage and called it protection. Whoever arranged the board and called it fate. Whoever put a child in a cupboard and called it necessary. There would be one. There was always one. We study, Wednesday said. We learn. We prepare. For what? She looked out the window at the diminishing ground below, already calculating. For whoever thinks they know what you're for, she said. And we make sure that when they look at you, they see exactly what they expect. She turned back to him and there was nothing warm in her expression, but there was something better than warmth. There was the absolute certainty of someone who had made a decision and did not make them lightly. And then we make sure they regret it very thoroughly. Harry opened the journal to the first page. Entry 1, make him expect something ordinary. He read it twice. Then he picked up the pen from Wednesday's bag. She'd left it on the armrest deliberately, he realized, and beneath it, in his own handwriting, small and slightly uneven, still learning how to hold a pen for something other than schoolwork at Privet Drive, he wrote, Entry 2, learn everything he thinks you don't know. He held it up for Wednesday to read. She read it. She didn't smile. Wednesday did not smile, as a rule, but she did something with her face that accomplished everything a smile would have and nothing a smile required. Good, she said. Below them, England was gone entirely. Above them, the sky was the particular shade of dark that comes before proper night, not black yet, just the deep blue of something becoming. Gerald turned in his jar on Harry's knee. The soldiers stood in careful formation in the shoebox. And Harry Potter, 5 years old, thin as a reed, holding a journal with 35 blank entries still to fill, felt something he was going to spend a long time learning to trust. He felt, for the first time, like something was beginning. He was right. Chapter 2, 8 Years of Wednesday. The Addams house was not haunted. It was, however, deeply interested in its occupants. The walls made sounds at night that were not settling, too deliberate for that, too rhythmic, like a very large something breathing slowly in the dark. The basement had 3 locks on the door and none of them were on the outside. The garden grew things that were not in any botanical catalogue Wednesday had checked, and she had checked all of them, because Wednesday was thorough about everything she found interesting. The 3rd floor had a wing that the family called the Quiet Hall, not because it was quiet, it very much was not, but because whatever lived in it preferred not to be discussed. Harry moved in on a Tuesday in October and was completely unbothered by all of it within 48 hours. This delighted everyone. Gomez found him on the 3rd morning sitting at the kitchen table with Gerald's jar and a book he'd taken from the 3rd floor library, the one with the iron lock that required both a key and a specific sequence of knocks, eating toast with the expression of someone deeply content. "How did you get into the library?" Gomez asked. "Wednesday told me the knock," Harry said. "She told you the knock," Gomez said. "She said it was the 2nd movement of a Bach cello suite played percussively. Then she played it on the wall 3 times until I had it." Gomez pressed both hands over his heart. His eyes went brilliant. "In 40 years, he said, in a voice compressed by feeling, she has never told anyone the knock." He sat down across from Harry and gripped the table with both hands and stared at him. "What are you reading?" Harry turned the book. The cover read, in badly faded gilt letters, Historia de Veninis Classicorum, which Harry couldn't read but the illustrations were excellent. "It's about poisons," Harry said. "I found the pictures first and then I asked Wednesday what it said and she translated the important parts. Her Latin is excellent," Gomez said proudly. "She says mine will be too," Harry said. "After we finish the Greek." "You're learning Greek. And Latin. And French." She said languages are like keys and the more keys you have the more doors you can open. Harry paused. "She also said some doors shouldn't be opened and it's important to know which ones, and to open those ones first." Gomez made a sound that was somewhat liquid. "That's my girl," he managed. The room that became Harry's was on the 2nd floor, across the hall from Wednesday's, between a room full of taxidermy that nobody seemed to own and a bathroom where the mirror told you what it actually thought of your appearance, which Harry found refreshing after years of being told he was abnormal for existing. The room had a window overlooking the back garden and a fireplace that burned green when it rained and a bookshelf that ran from floor to ceiling along one wall. It had been empty when he arrived. Within 3 weeks it was not. Morticia appeared one morning with a stack of books and set them on the shelf without explanation. They were mostly botanical and alchemical, with one extremely old volume on the medicinal properties of plants that were also weapons, and one slender book with no title on the spine that turned out, when Harry opened it, to be entirely blank inside except for the first page, which said, "Write what you learn. It remembers better than you will." He started writing in it that evening. Gomez gave him fencing lessons on Thursday afternoons in the long room on the ground floor that had, at some point, been a ballroom and now served as the fencing room, weapons room, and occasional crime scene for whatever Pugsley was working on. Gomez was a natural and passionate teacher in the way that only people who genuinely love what they're teaching can be. He demonstrated footwork with the showmanship of someone performing for an audience of thousands while simultaneously correcting Harry's grip with the precision of a surgeon. Harry turned out to have excellent reflexes and better instincts, and the day he first disarmed Gomez, Gomez fell to one knee and began a speech in 3 languages about the pride of a father witnessing a son's greatness. Harry, slightly embarrassed, helped him up. "I'm not your son," Harry said. "You live in my house, you've eaten at my table, and you just beat me with a riposte I spent 11 years perfecting," Gomez said. "What do you call that?" Harry thought about it. "Fair point," he said. He called Gomez Gomez and Morticia Morticia for approximately 4 months, at which point he began, without comment or ceremony, calling them Mama and Papa, and if this produced a scene of quiet weeping from Gomez that lasted most of a morning and a long, warm, slightly terrifying embrace from Morticia that smelled like nightshade and something darker and sweeter than either, Harry endured it with the equanimity of someone who had decided that being cried at was bearable if the crying was the right kind. He learned to tell the difference quickly. The right kind of crying was for joy, for pride, for beauty. The wrong kind was to diminish you. Harry had extensive experience with the wrong kind and none whatsoever with the right kind before the Addams family, and learning the difference was one of the more disorienting processes of his early years with them, because it required him to update something very fundamental about how he'd understood the world to work. Wednesday helped. Not by explaining it, Wednesday didn't explain things she thought you could work out yourself, but by being consistent. By being the same Wednesday in November that she'd been in October, the same Wednesday when she was frustrated that she was when she was pleased. There was something about that consistency that was, Harry came to understand, the most reliable form of love available, because it didn't require anything from you and it didn't vanish. They did lessons together every morning at the long table in the room Morticia called the study and everyone else called the map room because one entire wall was covered in a map of the world with pins in it representing various events and persons of interest, many of which were not in any standard historical record. Greek on Mondays, Latin on Tuesdays, mathematics and chemistry on Wednesdays, history, the real history, the kind that didn't make it into textbooks, on Thursdays. Fridays were for whatever they wanted. Friday mornings were Harry's favorite hours of the week for 6 years. They read, mostly. Wednesday had opinions about everything she read, stated flatly and absolutely, and Harry developed the habit of arguing with them, not because he disagreed, necessarily, but because disagreeing with Wednesday produced the most interesting conversations, and eventually because he actually did disagree with her on enough things to make it genuine. She was never annoyed when he pushed back. She was, he noticed, slightly more engaged. "Nietzsche is being deliberately obscure," Harry said, on a Friday morning in the 2nd year, pushing the book across the table. "He's being precise," Wednesday said, pushing it back. "There's a difference. Precision doesn't require being unreadable. Sometimes it does. When the thing you're saying can't be simplified without becoming wrong. Or when the writer is enjoying himself too much to stop." Wednesday was quiet for a moment. "Both can be true," she said. This was one of her consistent positions, that 2 things being true simultaneously was the rule rather than the exception, and anyone who wanted the world to operate on clean either/or logic was going to have a very frustrating time. The journal grew. Entry 3, winter of the 1st year, in Harry's handwriting, learn to be still. Interesting people notice still people less than moving ones. Also, still water conceals more than running water. Entry 7, spring of the 2nd year, Wednesday's writing, never answer a question with the answer. Answer it with a better question. The person who controls what is asked controls the room. Entry 11, in a hand that was a collaboration of both of them, know his rules better than he does. Then follow them exactly until the exact moment it matters not to. Entry 14, Harry's, a thing performed with total sincerity is invisible. It's the half-hearted performance people notice. Entry 19, Wednesdays, always be the one who already knows. Ignorance can be performed. Genuine ignorance cannot be recovered from. The entries didn't follow a consistent structure because the strategies didn't require one. Some were tactical. Some were philosophical. Some were what Pugsley called their evil homework, which he meant purely affectionately and which was at least partly accurate. They came from books they'd read and conversations they'd had and things they'd observed in the world around them, a politician on television caught managing his image, a neighbor who went quiet at precisely the wrong moment, a chess game between Wednesday and Gomez that lasted 9 hours and ended in a draw that both of them called a victory for different and equally valid reasons. Harry got good at chess. He got good at a lot of things, which was perhaps inevitable when you were raised by the Addams family and personally tutored by a Wednesday. But the thing he got best at, the thing that grew in him from the earliest months in the house on the Addams property and deepened every year after, was the thing that was hardest to name and most important to have: he got good at himself. He stopped flinching at sudden loud noises in the second year. He stopped waiting for permission to speak in the third. He stopped the habit, the deep, bone-level habit of Privet Drive, of making himself smaller in the presence of adults who made him nervous, and this took the longest because it wasn't a behavior he could just decide to stop but a reflex encoded in something much deeper than decision. Wednesday identified it in their third year, watching him with a visiting adult he didn't know, and she said afterward, "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" Harry said. "You pull your shoulders in," she said. "Very slightly. And you watch people's hands." He hadn't known he did it. He thought about it for a long time. "Because if you see the hand move, you have more time," he said. "I know why you do it," she said. "I'm telling you to stop." "What if, no one in this house is going to hit you," she said. "Not gently. Not with the careful cushioning most people would have put around it. Just as a fact, flat and complete." "I know," Harry said. "So stop watching hands." He worked on it. It took a year. But he worked on it. The magic was harder to work on because it didn't follow predictable rules, which Harry found frustrating and Wednesday found fascinating and Gomez found romantic in the old sense of the word, meaning it spoke to something ancient and operatic about the human condition. It came and went in pulses, more reliable when Harry was calm, wilder when he wasn't, and entirely beyond direction when he was either very angry or very happy, both of which produced different but equally impressive results. Their neighbor Aldous Finch Fletchley, who was indeed a wizard of considerable age and the approximate smell of cedar and regret that Wednesday had described, appeared at the house in Harry's second year and sat in the garden with Morticia for 2 hours drinking tea while Harry watched from the upstairs window with Wednesday beside him. "What are they talking about?" Harry asked. "About you," Wednesday said. "And about the world you come from." "What's he saying about it?" "That it's complicated," Wednesday said. "That there are politics. That your parents were important and that you are, in their terms, the only remaining piece of something unfinished." Harry watched the old man gesture at something in the air, drawing a shape. "What unfinished thing?" "A war," Wednesday said. "Supposedly ended. Someone tried to kill you when you were a baby. It didn't work, which they say is because of something your mother did, and the magic of it left a mark." She paused. "On your forehead." Harry touched the scar. He'd had it as long as he could remember. "I know about the scar." "You're famous for it," Wednesday said. "In their world." "Without knowing it." Harry was quiet for a moment, absorbing this with the focused stillness of someone adding a piece to a structure they've been building for a long time. "Famous for surviving." "Famous for surviving someone everyone was afraid of," Wednesday said. "Which means everyone will have a theory about what you are, and expectations about who you'll be, and plans about what you'll do." She paused. "And someone will have arranged all of it. The placement of you with your aunt and uncle. The timing of your entry into their world. The story they tell about you." "Who?" Wednesday's expression, which was always the same, did something at its edges. "We'll find out," she said. "That's what the journal is for." They both looked at it, sitting on the windowsill between them, considerably less slim now, filled past its halfway point. Entry 21, that same evening, in both their hands, find out who wrote the story before the story begins. Finch Fletchley came back twice more over the following years. The third time, Harry sat with him himself in the garden. He was 9 by then, composed and direct and possessed of the particular calm of someone who knows more than they're showing, and he asked questions with the precise accuracy of someone who has been preparing them for a long time. Where was the school? When would the letter come? Who decided what was taught and what wasn't? Who ran the ministry? Who ran the school? Finch Fletchley answered carefully, which meant he answered partially, which Harry noticed. You're leaving things out, Harry said. The old man looked at him. He had very sharp eyes, grey-blue, the eyes of someone who had spent a long time observing people. I'm telling you what I know, he said. You know more than you're saying, Harry said. Not accusatory. Just precise. Finch Fletchley was quiet for a moment. The headmaster of Hogwarts, he said, finally, is a very powerful and very well-intentioned man who has been running an extremely complex game for the better part of a century. His name, Harry said. Albus Dumbledore. Harry said nothing. He held the name in his head and turned it over the way you'd turn over a stone to see what lived underneath it. He placed me with my aunt and uncle, Harry said. Not a question. Finch Fletchley didn't confirm or deny it. He looked at his tea. Which was, in its way, an answer. He'll have plans for me, Harry said. Finch Fletchley stopped. Started again. He will have expectations. About what I'll be like, Harry said. About many things. Harry nodded, slowly. He looked at the garden, which was Morticia's garden and therefore beautiful in the specific way of things that were beautiful because they were honest about their nature, dark-flowered and deliberately structured and not remotely apologetic. He thought about the journal upstairs with its 20-something entries and its 30-something empty pages. What does the name Dumbledore mean? He said. Finch Fletchley blinked. I believe it's an old word. For Bumblebee. Harry considered this for a long moment. Right, he said. He went inside and wrote entry 22, know his name. Names are the first architecture of a person. Study the architecture. Pugsley, who was now 11 to Harry's 9 and had grown in every direction simultaneously, found him writing it and looked over his shoulder and said, "That's very dark homework," with deep admiration. "Thank you," Harry said. "Can I add one?" Harry slid the journal over. Pugsley considered it with serious thought and wrote, in his large, enthusiastic handwriting, entry 23, blow something up. Nothing ruins a plan like an unexpected explosion. Pugsley, Harry said. It's good advice. It is good advice, Harry agreed, but it needs to be specific. He took the pen back and added, an explosion at the right moment looks like an accident. At the wrong moment it looks like you know the difference. Pugsley read this. See, that's why you're better at this than me, he said. You're better at the actual explosions, Harry said. True, Pugsley said, satisfied. He helped himself to the biscuits on the table and departed, trailing crumbs and contentment. Harry celebrated his 10th birthday in the Addams house, which meant Gomez arranged a fencing tournament and Morticia baked a cake that was visually correct and contained exactly 3 ingredients that were not in any standard recipe, and Wednesday gave him a present wrapped in black paper, a slim, old book with no title and the peculiar quality of books that have been handled a great deal by people who took them seriously. What is it? Harry asked. Open it, Wednesday said. He opened it. The first chapter was titled On the Management of Expectation as a Tactical Resource, and the second was on the strategic value of being underestimated, and Harry read the first 3 pages right there at the table while everyone else ate cake. This is wonderful, he said. Chapter 7, Wednesday said. He flipped to Chapter 7. It was titled On the Specific Vulnerabilities of Men Who Believe Themselves Wise. He read the whole thing before the cake was finished. His 11th birthday was different. He woke up knowing, the way you know on certain days when something has shifted in the air. He came downstairs to find the family already at the table, and Gomez had his arms folded and an expression of barely contained excitement, and Morticia was serenely drinking coffee, and Pugsley was eating an enormous breakfast and pointedly looking at the ceiling. Wednesday was reading. On the table, beside Harry's place, was an envelope. It was thick, made of heavy yellowish parchment, and addressed in green ink, Mr. H. Potter, the map room, the Addams residence. There was a wax seal on the back with an H encircled by the emblems of 4 animals. Harry sat down. He picked it up. He turned it over. He read the address again, noting that it said the map room and not simply the house, which meant whoever sent it could see with some specificity where he spent his time, which he catalogued without comment. He opened it. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read it through once, completely, with the focused attention he gave to everything. Then he set it down on the table. Well, he said. Well, said Wednesday. It's real, Harry said. Not surprised, he'd believed Finch-Fletchley years ago. More like hearing a thing confirmed that you've been treating as confirmed while maintaining a small reservation, and releasing the reservation. Everything on the supply list, Gomez said, spreading his hands wide, we will get the finest version of. The wand, the cauldron, I believe there's a particular street, Diagon Alley, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. Finch-Fletchley mentioned it, Harry said. Of course he did, Morticia said, with the faint warmth she applied to things she found exactly right. Wednesday had set down her book. She was looking at Harry with the careful attention she applied to things that mattered. They had been preparing for this for 6 years, not obsessively, not exclusively, but with consistent, patient, thorough preparation the way you'd prepare for a journey into territory you'd mapped but not yet walked. He knew the history. He knew the politics. He knew the shape of the story he'd been placed inside. He also knew that knowing the map was not the same as walking the territory. You'll write, Gomez said, and it was not a question. Every week, Harry said. You'll eat properly, Morticia said. I'll try, Harry said honestly. You'll not let anyone diminish you, Wednesday said. This one she said differently than the others, not as instruction, exactly. More as confirmation of something already established. I know, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment longer. They had spent 6 years in the same house, at the same table, arguing about Nietzsche and practicing Latin conjugations and filling the journal entry by entry with every strategy they could devise and refine and test, and Wednesday Addams did not do sentiment, but she did do precision, and precisely what she felt in that moment was something she spent a long time afterward finding the right word for. It was certainty. The certainty of someone who has done the work and knows the work was the right kind. Entry 31, she said. Harry was already reaching for the journal, which had been sitting in the middle of the table because they both knew it would be needed today. He opened it to the correct page. What is it? He'll be watching you from the moment you arrive, Wednesday said. The sorting. The first classes. The friendships you form. He'll have a version of you that he expects, based on a story that was built without your consent. Everything you do will be filtered through that version. She paused. So the first move is simple. Arrive as yourself, Harry said, already writing. Not as the version he expects. More specific than that, Wednesday said. Arrive as a version of yourself he cannot categorize. Not threatening, he'd simply control the threat. Not humble, he'd guide the humble. Arrive as something genuinely new. Harry wrote it down. Entry 31, be genuinely new. Not a performance. Not a disguise. Something that can't be categorized, because categorized things can be managed. He looked at what he'd written. That's the hardest one, he said. Yes, Wednesday said. Which is why we've been doing all the others first. They went to Diagon Alley in August. Gomez wore his best pinstripe. Morticia wore the black dress that had once made a Parisian gallery owner actually faint. Pugsley had modified something in his pocket that was occasionally making a sound like distant thunder. Wednesday wore what Wednesday always wore and regarded the hidden magical street with the calm appraisal of someone arriving at a place they've been planning to visit for some time. Harry walked through the leaky cauldron into the alley and was immediately recognized. This was not unexpected. What was unexpected was the nature of being recognized. He had known, intellectually, from Finch-Fletchley's descriptions, from the books he'd read, from the entries in the journal, that he was famous in this world. He had not known what it felt like to walk into a room and have strangers' faces change when they saw him. He found it interesting and slightly irritating in equal measure. "They're staring," Pugsley said, with the cheerful scientific observation of someone cataloguing a phenomenon. "Yes," Harry said. "At you specifically." "Yes." "Does it bother you?" Harry considered. "Not the way they expect it to," he said. Wednesday was 2 steps behind him and slightly to the left, which was her preferred position, close enough to intervene if she chose to, far enough that her observation went unnoticed. She was watching everything, the stairs, Harry's reaction to them, the way the stairs changed when people took in the rest of the group, how quickly delight curdled into confusion when the Addams family failed to match any expected configuration. They got wand, robes, books, ingredients, cauldron. The Ollivander wand fitting was the most interesting portion of the day. The old wand maker looked at Harry in the same way everyone looked at Harry, except that Ollivander also tilted his head to one side in a way that suggested he was looking at something other than Harry's face. "Interesting," Ollivander said. "What is?" Harry said. "Your aura is layered," Ollivander said carefully. "Which is unusual for someone your age. Most children come in here quite transparent." "I've had good teachers," Harry said. Ollivander looked past Harry at the group in the doorway. His gaze passed over Gomez, Morticia, Pugsley, and landed on Wednesday. Wednesday looked back. Something moved across Ollivander's face, not quite recognition, more like the feeling of recognizing the type of thing you're looking at without knowing the specific thing. "Indeed," he said. "Let's try the holly. 11 3/4 inches. Holly and phoenix feather." It warmed in Harry's hand when he held it and the light came warm and gold and the shelves rattled slightly and Ollivander made his sound of satisfaction, and Harry looked at the wand with something that was not quite sentimentality but was the honest acknowledgement that this was the beginning of a new kind of work. "The phoenix who gave that feather," Ollivander said, "gave only one other. The wand that gave you that scar." Harry nodded. He'd known this was coming. Finch-Fletchley had mentioned the twin cores in their second meeting, carefully and without much context. He looked at the wand for another moment. Then he tucked it away. "Thank you," he said. On the way out, Wednesday fell into step beside him. "Well?" "Phoenix feather," Harry said. "Twin to Voldemort's wand." He kept his voice level. "Which means Dumbledore knew when he placed me there. He knew everything about me, the scar, the core, the prophecy, and he put me in a cupboard anyway." "Yes," Wednesday said. "For a reason." "Yes." Harry was quiet for a moment. The alley moved around them, witches and wizards and owls and cauldrons and the specific sensory richness of a world that had been existing alongside his without his knowledge. He took it all in and held it in the measured way of someone who had learned that the first response to new information was to hold it, not to act on it. "Entry 32, he said. Wednesday had the journal. She opened it, handed it to him with the pen. He wrote, while walking, in his neat, even hand, Entry 32, "The fact that he knows everything about you and placed you there anyway is not evidence of his cruelty. It's evidence of his certainty. He was certain you'd arrive exactly as he expected. He planned for that arrival. He did not plan for this one." He handed it back to Wednesday. She read it. She closed the journal. "Now there are 5 entries left," she said. I know, Harry said. I'm saving them. They had ice cream at Florian Fortescue's. Gomez had triple chocolate with what the menu called exotic spice and which he declared the finest thing he'd eaten outside of certain regions of South America. Pugsley found an apothecary and spent 20 minutes in extremely focused negotiation over ingredients that the shopkeeper seemed reluctant to sell. Morticia discovered a bookshop on a side street that was not in any of the guides and spent 45 minutes inside while the shopkeeper developed a visible expression of someone profoundly glad to be alive. Harry sat outside with Wednesday and watched the alley. Everyone knows who I am, he said. Yes. And none of them know who I actually am, he said. No, Wednesday said. They know who the story says you are. The boy who lived, Harry said. He said it with the specific tone of someone reading out a bureaucratic designation they find neither flattering nor insulting, simply imprecise. The boy who lived, Wednesday agreed. What do I want them to call me? Wednesday looked at him. What do you want them to call you? He thought about it seriously. Outside, a child pointed at him and a parent shushed the child and the child pointed again. An old wizard tipped his hat. A woman his mother's age, his birth mother's age, looked at him with such overwhelming emotion that Harry had the distinct impression he was being seen as a symbol and not a person, which was disorienting in a way he'd been intellectually prepared for but hadn't fully anticipated the feeling of. Harry, he said finally. Just Harry. Wednesday nodded. Then that's what you are, she said. In a world full of symbols and stories and assigned roles, you're just Harry. She paused. That will be the most unmanageable thing about you. Harry smiled. He didn't smile often and neither did Wednesday, and when he did it was real and slightly crooked and entirely itself. Because symbols can be used, he said. People can't. People can be attempted, Wednesday said. But not by men who've only ever dealt with symbols. 2 weeks before school started, Wednesday sat across from him in the map room at the long table where they'd done years of morning lessons and she produced the journal for the last time before he left for Hogwarts. She opened it to the pages that remained blank, the last 5 entries. I'm going to write the last one, she said. Entry 37. After everything else is done. What is it? Harry asked. You'll know it when you need it, she said. The other 4, she looked at him steadily. Are yours. Fill them as it happens. He looked at the blank pages. They represented a future he couldn't fully map yet, the specifics of teachers and classmates in a school that was going to look at him and see the story and not the person, and somewhere in it the old man who had built the cage that his entire childhood had been, at least in part, an answer to. What if I miss something? Harry said. You won't, Wednesday said. Not because you're perfect, she didn't believe in perfect. But because, you've had 6 years of Fridays. You know how to think. What if he's smarter than we've planned for? Then we adapt, Wednesday said. The journal was never supposed to be a script. It's an education. You don't use an education, you carry it. Harry closed the journal. He held it for a moment and then looked up at her. They'd been in this room together more times than he could count, morning after morning, year after year, the map of the world behind them with its pins and annotations, the windows with the Addams garden visible in all seasons, the perpetual tea and the perpetual argument and the perpetual quiet satisfaction of 2 people who found each other genuinely interesting. I'm going to miss this, he said. Wednesday gave him the look that meant she was being asked to engage with sentimentality, which she did not consider a weakness, exactly, but which she thought most people used as a substitute for what they actually wanted to say. Don't miss it, she said. Use it. That's not what, I'll visit at Christmas, she said. Okay, Harry said. And you'll write. Every week. And you won't let anyone diminish me, he said. I know. She held his gaze for a moment in the way she very rarely did, directly and without the slight strategic deflection she applied to most things. "You're going to be very annoying to him," she said. "I know," Harry said. "Good," she said. "That's the whole point." The morning he left for King's Cross, the whole family came. Gomez wore his traveling suit. Morticia wore the black coat that reached the floor. Pugsley had something in his bag that was making a periodic faint ticking sound that nobody commented on. Wednesday wore exactly what she always wore. Harry wore new robes, carried the journal in his inside pocket, had his trunk on a trolley, and had Gerald the spider, who was now an extremely venerable spider of some 6 years, which was remarkable, and who Harry was entirely convinced had been kept alive by some residual magic in their proximity, in a small wooden box with a velvet lining that Morticia had made for him. At the platform, at the barrier between 9 and 10, Gomez gripped both Harry's shoulders and looked at him with the full force of a man who had never in his life done anything at half measure. "Remember," Gomez said, "you are an Addams." "I'm a Potter," Harry said. "You are both," Gomez said, "and you will terrify them twice as much for it." Harry felt the truth of this in a way that wasn't pride, exactly, but was the bone-deep satisfaction of being correctly described. Morticia kissed his forehead, the uncursed side of it, precisely, because Morticia was precise about everything, and said nothing, because what she'd said over 6 years was already in him and didn't require repetition. Pugsley punched him on the arm with genuine warmth and said, "Blow something up if you need to," and Harry said, "I'll try to save it for an appropriate moment," and Pugsley said, "That's the Addams way." Wednesday was last. They stood facing each other at the barrier and she looked at him with the look that had started 6 years ago at the window of a cupboard in Surrey, the look of someone taking precise and complete inventory of what they were seeing. "Entry 33, she said. He produced the journal from his inside pocket. She had the pen. She wrote, and handed it back. He read it. "The first day is not about what happens. It's about what you choose not to react to." He tucked the journal back. He looked at her. "Ready?" she said. He considered the question seriously, the way he'd learned to consider everything seriously. Was he ready? He was 11 years old. He was lean and slightly shorter than average for his age and wore glasses repaired once and now properly fitted and had a scar on his forehead that meant something in a world he'd only read about, and one very particular old man was about to look at him and see the product of 30 years of planning. Was he ready? "Define ready," he said. The very corner of Wednesday's mouth moved, the not smile that accomplished everything a smile would. "Exactly," she said. "Go." He pushed the trolley through the barrier. Platform 9 3/4 opened up before him, steam and scarlet and noise and wonder and the smell of magic, which turned out to smell like thunder before a storm, and old books and something faintly electrical, and Harry Potter walked into it with his trunk and his owl and his spider in a velvet-lined box and the journal in his inside pocket, and he did not look back. He didn't need to. He carried it. Chapter 3, Sorting Hats and Opening Moves. The Hogwarts Express smelled like chocolate and old upholstery and the specific excitement of several hundred children who had no idea what was about to happen to them. Harry found a compartment near the back of the train, third from last, which gave him a view of both the corridor and the window, which Wednesday had once described as the only acceptable seating arrangement in any room where you didn't control the exits. He loaded his trunk into the rack above, settled Gerald's box on the seat beside him, and sat down with a book. He had been reading for approximately 8 minutes when the compartment door opened. The boy who looked in was tall and freckled and had the particular energy of someone who'd been in a large family for so long that entering a space alone felt like a minor adventure. He looked at the empty seats and then at Harry and then at Gerald's box with an expression that traveled through curiosity, settled briefly on wariness, and landed on a determined friendliness that Harry found genuinely appealing. "Everywhere else is full," the boy said. "Can I sit?" "Yes," Harry said. The boy pulled his trunk in and hauled it up with the practiced effort of someone who'd done this many times, sat down across from Harry, and stuck out his hand. "Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter," Harry said, and shook it. Ron's face did the thing, the recognition flicker, the quick involuntary glance at Harry's forehead, and then the visible effort to not make a thing of it. Harry had been watching people do this in Diagon Alley for 2 weeks, and Ron's version was somehow the most honest because the effort was so obvious and so genuine. "Sorry," Ron said. "Everyone does that, don't they?" "Yes," Harry said. "Does it bother you? Looking at the scar?" "No," Harry said. "Looking at the scar and then pretending you didn't?" "Slightly." Ron considered this with a frank directness that matched Harry's own. "Fair enough," he said. So, his eyes moved to Gerald's box. "What's in there?" "A spider," Harry said. "His name is Gerald." Ron went very still in the specific way of someone encountering a natural enemy. "How big is it?" he said, very carefully. "Quite large," Harry said, which was entirely true. Gerald was, by now, an impressive specimen. "Do you want to see him?" "Absolutely not," Ron said, with great feeling. Harry closed the box lid entirely and Ron visibly relaxed. They looked at each other for a moment, two 11-year-olds on a train heading towards something enormous, and then Ron produced a package of sandwiches from his pocket and held them out with the easy generosity of someone from a family where food was always shared. "Cheese," he said. "Or egg. Mum puts in too many. She always thinks," he stopped, reddened slightly. "Well." Harry took a cheese one. "What does your mother think?" "That I'll forget to eat," Ron said. "Which I don't. But she worries." He said it with the mild exasperation and complete warmth of someone who had never had to think carefully about whether a parent's worry was safe or dangerous, and Harry recognized this as a specific form of luck that Ron was entirely unaware of having. "She sounds good," Harry said. "She's brilliant," Ron said simply. "Terrifying, but brilliant." "The best ones are," Harry said. Ron gave him a look that reassessed something, quickly and without judgment. They ate sandwiches. Outside the window, England scrolled past, rolling green hills giving way to increasingly dramatic terrain as they moved north, the sky deepening, the light going amber. The compartment door opened again. The girl who looked in was holding a book against her chest and had a great deal of brown hair and an expression of focused purpose that Harry recognized as the expression of someone on a mission. She took in the compartment, both of them, the boxes on the seats, the atmosphere, and said, without preamble, "Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one." "No," Harry said. "No," Ron said. "She didn't leave." She looked at Harry, really looked at him, in the way Morticia had once described as the look of someone who had read about you and was now comparing, and said, "You're Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you. About your defeat of you-know-who, I mean, there's a chapter in Modern Magical History and you're mentioned in The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts and also in, What Do They Say?" Harry said. She blinked. "Sorry? In those books. About me. What do they say?" "That you, well, that you survived the killing curse as an infant and that you-know-who was defeated when it rebounded. Do they explain the mechanism?" No, actually. They don't. Most sources just say it was protective magic. What kind of protective magic?" Harry said. Hermione opened her mouth and closed it again. She was very clearly someone who was not used to not having the answer, and she was processing the specific discomfort of being mid-lecture and realizing there was a gap. "My mother's sacrifice," Harry said. "Specifically, a love-based magical protection that Voldemort's magic couldn't penetrate." Hermione winced at the name. "Does that word bother you?" Harry said. Everyone says you shouldn't, it's a name," Harry said. "Using it doesn't summon anyone. Avoiding it just makes the person who chose it feel more powerful than they should." Hermione stared at him for a moment. Then she sat down, apparently forgetting about Neville's toad entirely. "That's an interesting perspective," she said. "It's just logic," Harry said. "You know who said never use his name?" His supporters. Draw your own conclusions about why. Ron, who had been following this exchange with the focused attention of someone watching a particularly interesting match, pointed at Hermione. She has a point about the books, though. There are a lot of them. I know, Harry said. I haven't read them. Why not? Hermione said. Because they were written by people who weren't there, Harry said. And they were probably written to say what certain people wanted them to say. He paused. Do the books mention who placed me with my aunt and uncle after my parents died? Hermione thought about it. No, actually. Do they mention why? No. Do they ask? A pause. I don't think so. Then they're not really history, Harry said pleasantly. They're a story told from one particular angle. Which is fine, as long as you know that's what they are. Hermione was doing a rapid, visible recalibration of some internal model. Harry watched it happen with interest. She was, he decided, one of the most genuinely intelligent people he had encountered, and also one of the most thoroughly acculturated to a particular way of thinking. Authority equals correctness, books equal truth, the official version equals the actual version, and the collision of those two facts was written all over her face. Who taught you to think like that? She said. My sister, Harry said. Ron looked at him. You have a sister? She's not my sister by birth, Harry said. But yes. What's her name? Wednesday, Harry said, and because he'd been watching Ron and Hermione long enough to have some measure of them, he watched precisely. Hermione showed nothing. Ron's brow furrowed slightly. Wednesday, Ron said. It's her name, Harry said, with exactly the mild pleasantness of someone who is not inviting further observation on the subject. Right, Ron said. Fair enough. Hermione found Neville's toad eventually. It had gotten into a compartment 4 doors down and was apparently happy there, which Hermione said was irrelevant because it belonged to Neville, and Harry thought this was probably the correct position even if the toad disagreed. She came back and sat down again, which Harry noted without comment. She had brought the toad. She also brought Neville, who was round-faced and slightly anxious and clutched the returned toad, Trevor, apparently, with the relief of someone whose day had been salvaged. Neville looked at Harry and said, You're Harry Potter, in a voice that was part recognition and part something more personal, the look of someone who knows their story is adjacent to yours in some complicated way. I heard there might be something similar about your history, Harry said. Neville blinked. How did you? Someone mentioned the prophecy might refer to more than one person, Harry said. You were born at the end of July as well. Neville's expression became very careful. How do you know about the prophecy? I've been preparing for this for 6 years, Harry said simply. The prophecy, the war, the politics, the school. I try to know things before I need them rather than after. But no one's supposed to know about. Someone decided I wasn't supposed to know a lot of things, Harry said. I decided differently. There was a beat of silence in the compartment where everyone was processing, in their own way, the specific texture of Harry's manner, not aggressive, not showing off, just the matter-of-fact self-possession of someone who had operated from a position of genuine confidence for long enough that it had become their natural state. Neville sat down slowly. So you know, he said. About what happened to your parents. And the possibility that Voldemort could come back, Harry said. Yes. Are you afraid? Harry thought about this genuinely, the way Wednesday had taught him to think about genuine questions, not deflecting to reassurance, not performing courage, actually consulting what was true. No, he said. I'm interested. Neville looked at him for a long moment. I think, he said carefully, that's either the bravest or the most frightening thing I've ever heard. It can be both, Harry said. Ron, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly said, You know what, I think this is going to be a very unusual year, and the way he said it was neither concerned nor cautious. He said it the way you'd say I think this is going to be a very good game, with simple, forward-leaning anticipation. Harry looked at him. Ron shrugged, enormous and uncomplicated. Harry smiled. The castle, when they first saw it from the boats, did what it did to everyone: it made the world bigger. Harry looked at it the way he looked at new things, with complete attention, filing every detail, noting the way the lights moved in the towers and the way the lake surface reflected it double and the way the night air above it seemed different from the night air around it, more occupied somehow, more aware. Beside him in the boat, Neville whispered, "My grandmother described it but I didn't." "You can't describe it," Harry said. "You have to be here." They were herded into an antechamber by a witch named Professor McGonagall, who had the precise bearing and contained ferocity of someone who had spent 40 years maintaining standards in a world largely committed to ignoring them. She looked at them all with the assessment of someone who had seen 2 generations of children come through this door and was entirely unmoved by any of it, and she explained the sorting in clipped, decisive sentences. Harry watched her with interest. He liked her already, which he registered as a useful data point. When she left them to wait, the room promptly produced a ghost, several, actually, arguing, which Harry found more interesting than alarming. The other children clustered and chattered with first-night nerves that Harry observed from a slight distance, not because he was aloof but because he was thinking. The sorting. He had read about it. For houses, for sets of values, and a hat that decided. A hat, presumably, that had been doing this since the school's founding and that had spent enough centuries reading children to have developed a relatively complex algorithm. Which meant, Harry thought through this quietly, that the hat was likely to be nuanced. To see past a first impression. He wasn't worried about the hat. He was thinking about what happened after the hat. McGonagall returned. They filed in. The great hall opened above them, vast and candlelit, and Harry took it in, the 4 tables, the students already watching, the teachers at the high table at the far end. He scanned the high table with the focused efficiency of someone reading a map. Professor McGonagall, now at the front. A small woman who might be Sprout. A man with a greasy curtain of dark hair that had the particular tense stillness of someone who had been waiting for something for a long time. A man with a turban who was looking at Harry with an unpleasant intensity that had something nervous underneath it. And at the center of the high table, in the largest chair, the headmaster. Albus Dumbledore was old in the way of things that had been old for so long they had passed through old and into something else entirely, silver-bearded, half-moon spectacled, wearing robes of a purple so deep it was nearly theatrical, with an expression of benign, all-encompassing goodwill that had the precise quality of a well-rehearsed performance. Not because it wasn't genuine, Harry thought it probably was genuine, which was more complicated, but because it had been performed so long it had become its own kind of armor. He was already looking at Harry. Harry met his gaze. Steady, direct, unhurried. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. He simply looked, with the calm attention of someone who had been told the architecture of this moment years ago and was now walking through it in person. He watched Dumbledore adjust. It was very subtle, a slight shift in the set of the old man's shoulders, a microsecond recalibration. The look on his face did not change. But the adjustment was there, and Harry noted it and filed it neatly. Entry 1, make him expect something ordinary. He had walked in not ordinary. The game had already begun. The Sorting Hat sang its song, which Harry listened to with genuine interest, not for the forehouse description, which he knew, but for what the hat chose to emphasize, which told you something about what the hat considered important. The hat liked boldness. It liked wisdom. It liked loyalty. It liked a good thinker. What it didn't mention, Harry noted, was obedience, which probably meant either that obedience was assumed or that the hat had its own opinions about its value. The sorting began. Harry watched the students at the 4 tables, who cheered for whom, how long the difficult ones took, which professors leaned forward at which names. Hermione Granger, Gryffindor, hat barely touching her head. Neville Longbottom, Gryffindor, slightly longer pause that Neville looked relieved by. Ron Weasley, Gryffindor, approximately 2 seconds flat, looking entirely unsurprised. Potter, Harry. The room did what rooms do at that name. Every face that had been politely attentive snapped to full attention. The whispering that had threaded through the other names escalated briefly and then suppressed itself. Harry walked forward from the line and sat on the stool, and the hat came down over his eyes. "Well," said a voice in his head. "This is different." Harry said nothing. "I haven't seen preparation like this in, a very long time." "You've been thinking about this rather carefully." "For 6 years," Harry said. "Yes, I can see that. Most children come in here worried about where they'll end up." "You've already decided." Harry considered whether to deny this and decided it wasn't worth the effort. "I have preferences," he said. "Gryffindor," the hat said, and there was something in its voice that was not amusement but was related to it. "You want Gryffindor." "I want where my parents were," Harry said. "And where it will be most useful to be." "Useful for what?" "For what I'm planning." "And what are you planning, Harry Potter?" Harry thought of the journal. 33 entries and 4 blank pages and 1 entry that Wednesday had reserved for the end. He thought of 6 years of Friday mornings and fencing lessons and the precise calm of knowing who you were well enough that nobody else could tell you differently. "I'm planning to make it extremely difficult for a particular old man to manage me," Harry said. "While also learning magic. And finding out what actually happened to my parents. And making some friends, if possible." The hat was quiet for a moment. "Those are compatible goals," it said. "I know," Harry said. "The Slytherin argument is compelling," the hat began. "I know," Harry said. "But Slytherin is where he'd be most comfortable placing me. It fits his story. The dark-edged orphan with the parcel tongue, naturally ambitious, potentially dangerous. You are ambitious." "I'm also genuinely brave," Harry said. "I don't hide behind ambition. I just use everything I have." A pause. "Also, my best friend would be concerned if I went Slytherin, and I don't want to make her first week difficult." "Wednesday Addams," the hat said, and its tone was genuinely different now, the tone of something that had read many minds and very rarely encountered a person it hadn't seen the type of before. "Not your sister by birth. But the person who made you." "Interesting." "She'd say she helped," Harry said. "That's her version." "Is she wrong?" "No," Harry said. "But I'm also my own work." "Yes," the hat said, slowly. "Yes, you are." A pause. "Very well, Potter. There's only one honest answer." "Gryffindor," the hat shouted. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, set it on the stool, and walked to the table with the same unhurried pace he'd used coming in. He sat down between Hermione and the gap where the line had been, and the cheering was warm and surrounding, and he let it wash over him without being either swelled by it or unmoved by it, because it was neither about him specifically nor irrelevant to him specifically. It was about an idea of him, and ideas could be worked with. He looked up at the high table. Dumbledore was applauding with everyone else and smiling his benevolent smile and watching Harry with the eyes of someone revising a calculation. The man in the turban was not applauding. He was looking at Harry with that nervous intensity ratcheted up several degrees, and Harry looked at him steadily enough that the man looked away first. The man with the dark hair, Snape, Harry knew from his research, potions master, former Death Eater, extremely complicated personal history, was not applauding. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was almost architectural in its complexity, recognition, something cold, something that might have been contempt or might have been expectation or might have been both simultaneously. Harry met his eyes too. Held them for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned back to the table and accepted a bread roll from a cheerful Gryffindor who introduced himself as Percy Weasley, Ron's brother, and talked for 6 minutes straight about school regulations, which Harry listened to with what Percy clearly interpreted as respect and which was actually a form of data gathering. By the time the feast appeared, Harry had a working profile of everyone at the Gryffindor table and the specific dynamics between the houses, and he'd eaten the bread roll and accepted another, and Hermione was already asking him about his reading list with the focus of someone who had found a pier and was running with it at full speed. "You've read Hogwarts, a history?" she said. "3 times, Harry said. She blinked. 3, the first time to learn the structure. The second time to find what it avoided. The third time to understand why it avoided those things." Hermione stared at him. "What does it avoid?" "The Founders' conflict. The reason the houses are divided the way they are. The specific terms of the original charter." He paused. "And the substantial gaps in the record between about 1890 and 1920, which is interesting because that's when several important things happened that should probably be in a school history." "What kind of things?" "Political things," Harry said. "I'll lend you my notes if you want." She said yes with a speed that suggested she'd been waiting her whole life for someone who had notes, and Ron leaned across the table and said, "I'll take your word for it that the notes exist," which made Harry genuinely laugh. Professor Snape taught potions, which Harry had been looking forward to in the specific way of someone who knew a confrontation was coming and wanted to understand its parameters. The first potions class was on a Thursday, cold dungeons, the smell of something ancient and chemical, the Slytherins already seated and the Gryffindors filing in, and Snape at the front with his robes like a settled darkness and his voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that had nothing to do with volume. He called the register. When he reached Harry's name he paused with a precision that was itself a statement. "Ah yes," Snape said. "Harry Potter. Our celebrity." Several Slytherins smirked. Hermione's pen stopped moving. Ron went slightly pink with second-hand indignation. Harry looked up at Snape with the direct, level attention he gave everything. He did not deflect. He did not bristle. He did not perform humility or perform resentment. He simply looked, with the calm of someone who had been told this moment would come and had decided exactly how to greet it. "Professor Snape," Harry said. "Tell me, Potter," Snape said, moving along the front of the classroom with the particular theatrical pace of a man who knew how to use a room. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry knew the answer. He had read 1,000 magical herbs and fungi and magical drafts and potions twice each. He could have recited the answer with no difficulty whatsoever. He also recognized the question as a test of a very specific kind, not of knowledge, but of response. What Snape was actually testing was how Harry handled being put on the spot, whether he'd fumble or grandstand, whether he could be embarrassed or baited. "Draught of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. Asphodel is in the lily family." He said the last sentence with the exact neutrality of someone providing a botanical fact. The room was very quiet. Something moved across Snape's face that was too swift and too complicated to fully read. Harry caught the edges of it, anger and something underneath the anger that was not anger at all. Harry had known about Lily Evans. He had known about Snape and Lily Evans. He had known this topic would land, which was why he'd mentioned it, not to wound, because that would be cheap, but to establish, clearly and at the opening of the first class, that Harry Potter was not ignorant of his own history. "Where would you look," Snape said, after a moment, his voice perfectly controlled, "if I told you to find a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat," Harry said. "It's an antidote for most poisons. If you want the best quality ones you want mountain goats from high altitude, the mineral content affects the efficacy." Hermione's quill, which had been racing across her parchment, paused and she glanced at Harry sideways. "What is the difference," Snape said, "between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "There is no difference," Harry said. "Different names for the same plant. Also called aconite. It's worth knowing all 3 names because different texts use different ones and you can miss something important if you don't recognize the equivalents." Snape stopped walking. He stood at the front of the room and looked at Harry with an expression that had left contempt behind and was in currently uncharted territory. Harry looked back with the steady attention that was his baseline state. "Fame," Snape said, and his voice had shifted, still precise, still cold, but the showpiece contempt had been retired, which Harry registered as progress of a sort, "is clearly not entirely without substance in your case." "I just read the books," Harry said. "Most students read the books," Snape said. "I mean I actually read them," Harry said. "Not just the assigned sections." The Slytherin boy next to Harry, Draco Malfoy, who had introduced himself on the first day with the particular self-introduction of someone who expected their name to open doors and had been reassessing since Harry's response to his handshake offer on the first morning had been a polite, measured non-commitment, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Snape's gaze moved to Malfoy, then back to Harry. Something had shifted in the room and everyone could feel it, but nobody could have said exactly what had shifted or which direction it had gone. Harry uncapped his ink and started taking notes, because the class was beginning and the lesson was, in several senses, already in progress. They brewed a simple potion. Harry's was correct. Neville Longbottom's, 3 seats to his left, was badly wrong, and Snape descended on it with his particular surgical unkindness, and Harry watched Neville go smaller under it with the specific recognition of someone who knew exactly what that shrinking cost. After class, walking out with Ron and Hermione, Harry fell into step beside Neville deliberately. "Your heat was too high," Harry said quietly. "The porcupine quills should have gone in after you took it off." "He won't tell you that, but that was the actual mistake. Everything else was fine." Neville looked at him. "How did you?" "I was watching," Harry said. "Fix the heat and the timing next class. It'll work." Neville nodded, slowly. The anxiety on his face had reorganized itself into something more like determination, which was a substantial improvement. Hermione had heard. She looked at Harry with the expression she was developing specifically for him, the one that meant she was updating her model of something. The defense against the dark arts class was a different matter entirely. Professor Quirrell taught it, the man with the turban, whose nervous intensity up close resolved itself into something with a very strange quality, like a vibration at a frequency slightly off from what you'd expect. He stuttered. He flinched. He told them about vampires in a tone that managed to be simultaneously too frightened and too rehearsed, and the class had the atmosphere of something being badly performed rather than genuinely felt. Harry sat in the third row and paid attention in the way he paid attention to things that were wrong in ways that hadn't revealed themselves yet, fully, without showing how fully. The smell was strange. Not the turban, exactly, but what was underneath the turban, and Harry had an excellent nose that he'd developed partly through 6 years of proximity to Morticia's garden and partly through the simple habit of paying attention to things other people ignored. After class, walking out with Ron, Harry said, very quietly, "Something is wrong with Quirrell." Ron glanced back at the classroom. "He's just nervous, isn't he?" "That's what everyone says." "He had a bad experience with a vampire in." "He's not nervous," Harry said. "He's performing nervous. There's a difference." Ron considered this. "How can you tell?" "Nervous people flinch at unpredictable things," Harry said. "Quirrell flinches at scheduled moments. It's rehearsed." Ron looked at him for a moment and then said, "You know what, I'm glad we're friends," which Harry thought was one of the nicer things anyone had ever said to him. He wrote home that evening, to Gomez and Morticia, a long letter with all the architectural details and the high table reading and the sorting and the potions class and his notes on Quirrell. To Pugsley, a shorter letter with the details about the moving staircases and the trick steps that Pugsley would find professionally relevant. And to Wednesday, the longest letter, because Wednesday required the full account and would notice anything he left out. He'd just finished Wednesday's letter when the common room, which had been loud with first-week energy, went quiet. Harry looked up. Professor Dumbledore was standing in the entrance, which was unusual, Harry thought, for a headmaster to visit a common room, especially this early in the term, and he stood with his hands clasped and his half-moon glasses and his expression of warm, knowing benevolence. "Mr. Potter," he said, across the room. A word, if you have a moment. Harry sealed Wednesday's letter and put it in his pocket. He stood up, registered Ron's slightly wide-eyed expression across the room, Hermione's sharp attention, and the general heightened awareness of everyone in the vicinity. He walked across the common room to Dumbledore and they went out into the corridor. Dumbledore began walking at the measured pace of someone who believes that pace controls the conversation, and Harry walked beside him without adjusting his own rhythm. "I wanted to welcome you personally," Dumbledore said. "The start of term can be overwhelming." "It's been fine," Harry said. "Settling in well?" "The other students are treating you well," Harry said. "Yes. I've made some friends I think will last." "Wonderful," Dumbledore said, with the warmth he applied to everything. "Your parents, you know, both attended Hogwarts." "I know," Harry said. A small pause in the walking pace, barely perceptible. "Of course you do. You've been studying." "Since I was 5, Harry said. "When I started living with my family." "Your aunt and uncle, I was glad to know you were placed with family," Dumbledore said. "Blood protection, you understand," Mr. Finch Fletchley explained the magical mechanics, Harry said pleasantly. "The blood protection bound to Petunia Dursley's love for her sister. The protection that required me to call the house home." He paused for exactly one beat. "I've always wondered, did it require me to be happy there? Or just present?" The warmth in Dumbledore's expression didn't change. It never changed. Harry had known it wouldn't change, which was the thing about the warmth. It was real, in the sense that Dumbledore genuinely believed in it, but it was also completely impermeable, which meant it functioned as a wall rather than a window. "Harry," Dumbledore said, with enormous gentleness. "I made the best decision I could with the information I had." "I'm sure you did," Harry said. "I'm not angry about it." "I'm glad to hear. I just think," Harry said, in the same pleasant, unhurried tone, "that you should know that I know about it. The placement. The blood wards. The reasons." Another beat. "I prefer to be accurate about what happened to me." They had stopped walking. They were in a corridor lit by torches and the portraits on the walls were pretending to be asleep, which portraits never did unless they wanted to hear something better. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Really looked, in the way he hadn't needed to look at anything in a very long time because he always already knew what he was looking at. "You've had an unusual upbringing," he said. "I have," Harry said. "It was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Tell me about your family," Dumbledore said, and his tone was the tone of someone asking a question they believe is casual but that they actually very much want the answer to. "The Addams family," Harry said. "My father is Gomez Addams, he's a lawyer by training, a swordsman by passion. My mother is Morticia. She keeps a garden I'd recommend not touching. My brother Pugsley is the best natural chemist I've ever met, and I mean that with full awareness of the implications. My sister is Wednesday." He looked at Dumbledore and allowed the smallest, most precise pause in the world. "She sends her regards." Dumbledore absorbed this. The benevolent expression remained perfectly intact. But Harry, watching with the attention of someone who had spent 6 years learning to read what people concealed under their expressions, saw something behind the half-moon glasses that was the first honest thing Dumbledore had shown him all evening. It was surprise. Genuine, uncurated surprise. Not at the names. At the tone. Because Harry had said all of it, every word, in the tone of someone who was entirely comfortable and completely unintimidated and had nothing to manage and was, if anything, mildly enjoying the conversation, which was not the tone of any version of Harry Potter that Albus Dumbledore had planned for. "I hope to meet them one day," Dumbledore said, recovering perfectly. "They'd find that interesting," Harry said. "Wednesday especially." He looked at the headmaster with the calm, open directness that was his natural face, and said, "I should get back, I have letters to finish. Good evening, Professor." He walked back down the corridor. He did not walk quickly. He did not look back. He walked at exactly the pace of someone who had nowhere more urgent to be and nothing to prove and had just finished a conversation that had gone entirely as he'd intended. He went back into the common room, sat down, pulled out Wednesday's letter, and added 3 lines at the bottom. He's more interesting in person. The warmth is real, which makes it more complicated. He's not cruel and he's not stupid and he genuinely believes he's protecting everyone, which means the hardest part isn't going to be fighting him. It's going to be deciding what to do with someone whose most dangerous quality is how much he actually cares. I think I need entry 34. He sealed it. Then he took out the journal and turned to the blank pages. He wrote, Entry 34, understand your opponent's genuine strengths. His warmth, his certainty, his patience, these are not performances. They are real. Real things are harder to counter than performed ones because you can't simply expose them. You have to be more real in return. He looked at what he'd written for a long time. Then he looked up at the fire burning in the Gryffindor common room, the other first-years scattered around it on chairs and the floor, Ron and Hermione deep in something that looked like it had started as an argument about chess and evolved into something more cooperative, Neville sitting with his herbology book and a small, determined expression. Real, Harry thought. He'd been made real by a very particular kind of upbringing and a very particular kind of sister. He was, right now, the most genuinely himself he could possibly be, not a symbol, not a savior, not the boy from the story, but someone with 6 years of Fridays and a fencing instinct and 34 journal entries and the absolute bone-deep certainty that he was not going to be managed. He pocketed the journal and went to join Ron at the chess board. Ron beat him soundly and was so delighted about it that he couldn't stop grinning, and Harry thought, yes. This is one of the ones that lasts. He was right about that too. Chapter 4, The Philosopher's Stone can wait. The first snow hit Hogwarts in late November and turned the grounds into something from a different kind of story, the kind Wednesday would have read once, acknowledged as aesthetically competent, and set aside. Harry stood at the window of the Gryffindor common room on a Sunday morning with a cup of tea that Hermione had pressed on him and watched the snow settle on the grounds with the specific thinking face that Ron had learned meant Harry was working something out and interrupting him would be counterproductive. Ron was learning a lot of things about Harry. He'd learned that Harry ate methodically, always clearing one thing before moving to the next, which was the habit of someone who'd eaten in an environment where food could be taken away. He'd learned that Harry never sat with his back to a door. He'd learned that the calm was real, not performed, not a mask over something more volatile, but that underneath the calm was something with very deep roots and extremely clear opinions, and when those opinions engaged with something in the world, they did so with the focused certainty of a chess piece that had been waiting for the correct square. He'd also learned that Harry could be genuinely funny in a way that snuck up on you, and that he was the only person Ron had ever met who could argue with Hermione about something academic and leave her better informed rather than annoyed, and that his relationship with Gerald the Spider was something Ron had made a personal policy of not investigating too closely. He's moving something, Harry said, still looking at the window. Ron looked up from his exploding snap cards. What? Quirrell. He's been in the third-floor corridor twice this week. How do you know that? I walk, Harry said. I pay attention to who else is walking. Harry, it's the restricted corridor. Dumbledore said it was out of bounds for students and that anyone going in there would face a most painful death, Harry said. He didn't say staff couldn't go in. He also didn't say why, which is interesting. Because it's dangerous, Ron said. Everything dangerous has a reason for being there, Harry said. Danger for its own sake is just mess. The third-floor corridor has something valuable in it that's being protected, and Quirrell has been checking on it, and the reason that's interesting is that Quirrell is already interesting for other reasons. He turned from the window and sat down across from Ron. Outside, the snow continued. The fire crackled. The common room was lazy with Sunday, most of the Gryffindors still in bed or at breakfast, a few fifth-years occupying the good chairs by the fire with their homework spread out like territorial claims. The smell, Harry said. You've mentioned the smell. It's gotten stronger, Harry said. Around Quirrell. Whatever is underneath the turban, it's more present than it was in September. Ron put down his cards. He had a good instinct for when Harry was being theoretical and when Harry was being specific, and this was specific. You think it's you-know-who. I think there's something alive and angry living in Quirrell's head, Harry said. I think the trembling and the stutter aren't nervousness, they're the behavioral output of someone being inhabited by something they can't fully contain. And I think if I'm right about what's in the third-floor corridor, then we have a situation where the thing that wants to kill me has taken a host at this school and is actively working towards something I should probably understand before it reaches the part where it becomes difficult. Ron was quiet for a moment. How are you this calm about it? I'm not calm, Harry said. I'm organized. What's the difference? Calm is the absence of feeling, Harry said. Organized is feeling things in the right order. Ron absorbed this. What's the right order? First, understand it fully. Then decide what to do. Then do it. Harry picked up his tea. Getting frightened before the understanding phase just makes the understanding harder. I feel like most people would be frightened regardless, Ron said. Most people, Harry agreed, without arrogance. Just as a fact. He'd written to Wednesday 3 weeks ago about the Quirrell situation, laying out what he'd observed and what he suspected, and her reply had come back in 4 days, 4 pages in her precise, compact script, covering the known history of Voldemort's disembodied state, the theory of possession, 3 specific methods of identifying genuine possession versus performance, and ending with, if you're right, he's not there for the school year. He needs something specific. Find out what before he finds it. He'd found out what 3 days later, because the other reliable source of information at Hogwarts was the one everyone consistently underused. The library. Not the books everyone read, the ones Hermione had already catalogued in her remarkable internal database and which Harry had covered in his pre-Hogwarts reading. The other books. The ones in the section nobody visited because the system for finding them was inconvenient and the librarian, Madame Pants, had the energy of someone who believed strongly that books were too important to be read by people who hadn't sufficiently demonstrated worthiness. Harry had demonstrated worthiness on his 3rd library visit by correctly identifying a misfiled text on alchemical notation from the wrong end of the stacks, at which point Madame Pants had looked at him with the expression of someone encountering an unexpected colleague and had become considerably more forthcoming about where things were. The Philosopher's Stone had, it turned out, a fairly accessible published history, if you knew what you were looking for and how to piece together references across 4 different source texts. Nicholas Flamel, the stone's creator, had been a footnote in the history of alchemy for 600 years and a partner of Albus Dumbledore's, which, combined with everything else, was not a footnote at all but a flashing indicator. Harry had compiled everything into a 12-page document, showed it to Hermione, who turned pale and then immediately began her own parallel research, and then shown it to Ron over dinner with the factual presentation of a man delivering a weather report. So there's an immortality stone in the school, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. And a piece of Voldemort is trying to get it. Almost certainly. And Dumbledore knows it's there because he's the one who had it moved here. Yes. And he knows about Quirrell, or he should, you'd think, he's the most powerful wizard alive, which raises the question, Harry said, of whether Dumbledore knows about Quirrell and is allowing the situation to develop, or whether Dumbledore knows about Quirrell and is waiting for me to discover it and act on it, or whether Dumbledore genuinely doesn't know, which I think is the least likely option. Ron stared at him. You think Dumbledore might be letting it happen? I think Dumbledore thinks in very long arcs, Harry said. I think the Philosopher's Stone might be bait, and the trap might not be for Quirrell. Who's it for? Ron said, and then answered his own question while he was still asking it. Oh, he said. For you. He needs to know what I am, Harry said. What I'm capable of. Whether I'm what he needs me to be. He paused. The best way to find out is to create a situation where what you need someone to be is exactly what the situation requires and then see if they step into it. Ron struggled for the word. It's not monstrous, Harry said, because he'd thought about this carefully, the same way he'd thought about every aspect of Dumbledore's character carefully. He's not doing it out of cruelty. He genuinely believes the outcome justifies the management. He's been running a war for 50 years. The habits of a strategist who believes in a cause, they're very hard to interrogate from the inside. Still, Ron said. Still, Harry agreed. That doesn't mean I'm going to walk into his trap. Hermione, who had been listening to this entire exchange with the focused attention she applied to everything she found both fascinating and deeply uncomfortable, said, "What are you going to do?" Harry had been thinking about this for 2 weeks. He reached into his pocket and put the journal on the table between them, the slim, worn black journal that he'd carried every day since the train. He opened it to the current entry. He turned it so they could both read. Entry 35, when the trap is designed for you specifically, the response is not to avoid it entirely or to walk into it completely. The response is to enter it on your own terms, change the terms, and make sure the outcome serves your purposes rather than theirs. Hermione read it twice. Ron read it once very fast and then again slower. They looked at Harry. "You're going to go to the third-floor corridor," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. "On purpose," she said. "Very much on purpose," Harry said. "But when I choose and how I choose and with the outcome I choose." He looked at both of them. "You don't have to come." Ron picked up his cards again, shuffled them with practiced hands. "Obviously I'm coming," he said. Hermione opened her mouth to say something about rules, school regulations, and the several specific prohibitions that applied to the third-floor corridor. She closed it again. She opened it again. "I'm coming too," she said, in the tone of someone who has decided something they are not entirely pleased about deciding. "But I want it on record that this is dangerous and ill-advised." "It's on record," Harry said. "Good," she said. "Also, what's the journal?" "It's a record of strategies," Harry said. "My sister and I have been building it since I was 5. "Your sister Wednesday," Hermione said. She'd heard about Wednesday in increments over the term, never a full account, because Harry gave accounts of Wednesday the way you'd give an account of weather or geography, as context rather than story, which made her more present rather than less. "How many strategies are in it?" Ron asked. 37, Harry said. "There are still 2 blank entries." "What are they for?" "I don't know yet," Harry said. "Wednesday's holding the last one." They went to the third-floor corridor on a Tuesday night in December, 3 days before the Christmas holidays, which Harry had timed specifically because the castle would be moving toward its pre-holiday rhythm, staff slightly distracted, students excited or tense with end of term, and the usual patterns of patrol would have shifted. He knew the patrol patterns because he'd spent 2 months walking the castle systematically, always at slightly different times, which was the kind of activity that produced no observable output until suddenly it produced everything. He also knew, because he'd been watching Quirrell with the patient attention of a naturalist, that Tuesdays were when Quirrell went to his room early, and that the smell, the wrong, dark, inhabited smell, was at its weakest on Tuesdays, as if whatever shared Quirrell's had receded on a schedule. The corridor itself opened on a heavy locked door that Harry dealt with in 11 seconds. 6 years of Morticia's garden had, among other things, produced a thorough education in locks both conventional and otherwise, and inside was the 3-headed dog that everyone had been frightened of, the enormous animal that should have been terrifying, that was intended to be terrifying, that was lying on its side with all 3 heads in various stages of a sleep so profound it was essentially geological. "It's asleep," Ron said, at approximately the volume of someone who'd forgotten they were trying to be quiet. "There's a harp," Hermione said. "It was playing and put it to sleep." Harry looked at the harp, which was winding down from someone else's use. He looked at the trapdoor beneath the dog's enormous paw. He crouched down and looked at the edges of it with the focused attention of someone reading a document. "Someone's already been through," he said. "Quirrell," Hermione said. Her voice had gone the specific taut quality of someone whose worst hypothesis has been confirmed. Recently, Harry said. He stood. He looked at Ron and Hermione. Here's what we're going to do, he said. We're not going after the stone tonight. Ron started. We're not going after the stone tonight, Harry said again. We're mapping the defenses. We come back, we know what's down there, and we don't act until I've written to Dumbledore. You're going to write to Dumbledore, Hermione said. About the stone. I'm going to write to Dumbledore, Harry said, and tell him that I know what's in the corridor, that I believe Quirrell has already been through the defenses and that the stone may be in immediate danger, and I'm going to do it formally and in writing with a full account of my observations dating back to September. He paused. Because if I go through that trapdoor tonight without telling anyone, and I deal with whatever is down there on my own, then Dumbledore controls the narrative of what happened. He says I acted recklessly, he says I was brave and lucky, he says the boy who lived does it again, and the whole story gets absorbed into his version. But if you write to him first, Hermione said, slowly, and create a written record, then whatever happens, I was the one who identified the threat, reported it through proper channels, and acted only when it was clear the channels weren't sufficient, Harry said. It creates a record of what I did and why, in my own words, before the event. He can't rewrite a letter he already received. There was a silence. Ron said, that's actually brilliant. It's entry 7, Harry said. My sister wrote it. Never answer a question with the answer. Answer it with a better question. The person who controls what is asked controls the room. If I let him ask the questions afterward, he controls the story. I ask the questions first. They went back to the common room. Harry wrote the letter to Dumbledore that night, 3 pages, precise and factual, laying out every observation he'd made since September in chronological order, referencing specific dates and times, noting the smell, the behavioral patterns, the library research, the state of the defenses when he'd looked. He signed it Harry James Potter Addams, first year, Gryffindor, and he included a note at the end. I am notifying you of this because I believe you have been managing the situation and I wish you to know that I have been observing it. If the stone requires active defense tonight, I would ask that you act on this information. If you choose not to, I will need to act on it myself, and I will document that decision. He sealed it and sent it with the school owl that would be fastest, not his own owl, because his own owl had been watched by Dumbledore's portraits since mid-October, which Harry had noticed and accommodated. Then he wrote to Wednesday. He's built a trap using an immortality stone as bait. Quirrell is the vehicle for the thing that should be dead and isn't. I've documented everything and sent it to Dumbledore. Not because I trust him to act on it, because I need the record. If he acts, the stone is safe and he knows I'm not the passive piece he expected. If he doesn't act, I'll deal with it myself, and the letter makes clear that I tried the correct channels first. Either way, the documentation is the move. Entry 35. Tell me if I've missed anything. He sealed that one too. Then he went to sleep, which was the move that Ron found most impressive, and Hermione found most baffling, and which Harry found simply logical. There was nothing more to be done tonight, and tired minds made worse decisions, and if something was going to require a clear head tomorrow then the clear head needed sleep. The response from Dumbledore arrived the following morning. It was brief. It was warm. It thanked Harry for his thoroughness and assured him the matter was in hand, that appropriate arrangements had been made, that there was no need for Harry to concern himself further, and that his diligence was a credit to Gryffindor. It was the response of a man who had received the letter and recalibrated and had chosen to absorb it gracefully. It was also, Harry noted, a response that contained no specifics whatsoever. No confirmation of what was in the corridor. No acknowledgement of what Quirrell was. No statement about what actions were being taken. He read it at breakfast with Ron on his left and Hermione on his right. He folded it and put it in his pocket. Well? Ron said. He's handled it, Harry said. Or he's chosen to let it develop and he's managing me. How do you know which? Hermione said. I don't, Harry said. Yet. He watched Quirrell at the staff table. Quirrell was eating porridge with the slightly unfocused attention of a man who was not entirely present, and the inhabited quality, that wrong vibration at the wrong frequency, was exactly as it had been yesterday. Whatever Dumbledore had done with the stone, it hadn't changed the fact of Quirrell. 3 days later, most of the school went home for Christmas. Harry did not go home. He stayed, because he wanted to watch the castle at low population, and because he needed to think, and because Gomez had wept magnificently on the platform at King's Cross and made Harry promise to come home for the summer as if summer were both a certainty and a personal triumph, which Harry had promised while also knowing that what needed to happen here might not wait until summer. Ron stayed too, which he announced at breakfast on the day of departure with the ease of someone who'd decided something and wasn't making a thing of it. Mum wanted us all home but I told her I'd rather stay. He shrugged. Also I want to be here if the corridor business comes to anything. Harry looked at him. You don't have to, Harry, Ron said. We're friends. That's what that means. It was such a simple and complete statement that Harry, who had grown up in a family that showed love through action and precision and the reliable fact of being there, and who had therefore understood love in a practiced and intellectual sense for years without experiencing the simple uncurated version of it, Harry sat with it for a moment. Right, he said. Thank you. Don't mention it, Ron said. Literally. It's embarrassing. Christmas at Hogwarts was strange and quiet and somewhat wonderful. The decorations were extravagant to the point of architectural, and the reduced population meant the castle's character was more visible, the way the staircases moved more freely when they weren't being navigated by several hundred people, the way the paintings talked at normal volume instead of competing with student noise, the way the Great Hall felt both larger and warmer with only a few tables occupied. Harry received presents that made him briefly unable to speak. Gomez sent a fencing foil, not a practice one, a real one, the kind you used when you were serious, with a note that said for when the world requires a riposte. Which it will. The Addams name is on the blade. So is yours. Morticia sent a book that had no title, bound in something that was very dark green and very old, and which turned out to contain 300 years of Addams' botanical research including several plants that Harry suspected were not remotely legal and were absolutely useful. Pugsley sent something wrapped in so much padding that it took 15 minutes to unwrap and turned out to be a small, dense, spherical object accompanied by a note that said don't drop it on stone floors. Or carpet. Actually just hold it very gently and keep it away from open flames. It's for emergencies. Happy Christmas. And Wednesday sent a letter. He read it twice, sitting on his bed in the emptied dormitory, Gerald's box on the pillow beside him. The letter was a single page, dense with her compact handwriting, and it contained a full analysis of everything he'd written to her since September, organized by category, with her assessments and the gaps she'd identified in his reasoning. A reference to entry 19, always be the one who already knows, with a note that said he'd been using it well. A brief observation about Snape that was the most precisely accurate character reading Harry had encountered from someone who'd never met the man. And at the very end, 2 lines, he's not your enemy. He's something harder, he's your obstacle. The difference matters. You can fight an enemy. An obstacle you have to go around, or become larger than, or change the shape of so that it's no longer blocking the way. I've been thinking about entry 37. Not yet. But soon. Harry folded the letter and held it for a moment and thought about the difference between enemies and obstacles, and about the specific problem of genuinely caring about someone whose method of caring was harmful, and about the fact that Dumbledore was probably the most interesting problem he'd ever encountered because the very things that made him most dangerous were also the things that made him most human. He put the letter in the journal, between pages 35 and 36, which were the 2 remaining blank entries. He would fill them when he knew what they needed to say. The confrontation with the Philosopher's Stone came in June, which was not when Harry had expected it to come and which, looking back, he should have predicted, because Dumbledore's planning operated on the scale of months and Harry had been thinking in weeks. The clues aligned in the second week of June, Hagrid letting slip something about a dog and a harp and Fluffy, Hermione making a connection in the library between the defenses and the specific magical disciplines of the staff who designed them, Ron working out the chess logic in a way that made him briefly very quiet because he understood what it meant. And Harry, who had been watching Quirrell all year with the steady attention of someone tracking a storm system, watched the inhabited quality in the man spike sharply upward on a Wednesday night and knew, with the bone certainty of someone whose instincts had been trained for 6 years, that it was now. They went through the trapdoor. The defenses were interesting. Harry moved through them the way he moved through everything, with complete attention, the right tool for the right problem, no wasted motion. The devil's snare was a problem for someone who panicked in the dark, which none of them did. Ron handled the chess, the real chess, the violent magical chess, with a tactical brilliance that Harry watched with genuine admiration and filed for later consideration because Ron Weasley was, when given a board and pieces and a genuine problem, operating at a level that had nothing to do with the casual chess-playing Harry had seen all year. He also, Harry noted, sacrificed himself with the matter-of-fact commitment of someone for whom the correct move was simply the correct move, and Harry thought, yes. This is exactly who he is. I'll be fine, Ron said, from the ground where the knight had knocked him. Go. Both of you. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at her. Go back through the flames, Harry said. Send an owl to Dumbledore. Not a school owl, your parents' owl, the one he hasn't been tracking. The letter's already written, it's the second one in the left drawer of my trunk. Send it to Dumbledore and one to the Ministry of Magic, to the Auror Department directly. You've had the letter ready, Hermione said. Since March, Harry said. Go. She went. The potion room was cold and logical and contained 7 bottles and a poem, and Harry solved it in 4 minutes because he was good at logic and had spent 4 years studying chemistry with Pugsley's modifications in mind, which meant his understanding of what things could be combined with what was substantially beyond first-year standard. Then the final room. It was not Quirrell Harry was thinking about when he went through the last door. He had known it was Quirrell and not Snape since October. This was information he'd had and held. He was thinking about what Wednesday had said, not your enemy, your obstacle. He was thinking about the journal in his inner pocket. He was thinking about the fact that the Philosopher's Stone was, according to the mirror he could see at the other end of the room, doing something in his pocket that suggested the stone had already found him rather than the other way around. Quirrell stood with his back to him, looking at the mirror of Eriste. I wondered when you'd come, Quirrell said, and the stutter was entirely gone, which confirmed everything it needed to confirm. I've been watching you since September, Harry said, walking forward into the room. The smell. The trembling pattern. The trips to the corridor on Tuesdays. Quirrell turned. His expression had the strange layered quality of a face with something else looking out of it. The famous Harry Potter, he said. And yet not at all what I expected. Harry said. Something moved in Quirrell's eyes that wasn't Quirrell. Come here, boy, a voice said, from the back of Quirrell's head, Harry realized, which was why the turban had always been wrong. Let me look at you. No, Harry said. A pause. No, the voice said. No, Harry confirmed. You've been in that turban all year and I've been watching you. I know what you are. I know what you want. I know what the stone can do and why you want it and what your current situation prevents you from doing with it. He paused. I also know that the stone is in my pocket right now, which happened approximately 30 seconds ago because I wanted to look in the mirror before you remembered to use it, and because the stone's protection responds to the intention of acquisition. If you want it for yourself, you can't see it or hold it. Quirrell's hand came out. The stone, Harry knew, was already in his pocket. He could feel its warmth against his ribs, dense and significant. He watched Quirrell's face with the full attention of someone watching a problem reach its critical point. Give it to me, Voldemort's voice said. No, Harry said, with the same pleasant matter-of-fact tone he'd used all year when people told him to do things he wasn't going to do. "I will kill you," the voice said, and it said it with the full force of something that had been killing things for decades and was entirely certain of its own capability. Harry thought about this. He thought about what Wednesday would say, and about Morticia's garden, and about Gomez weeping with pride over a riposte, and about 6 years of the right kind of careful preparation, and about the fact that he was 11 years old in a room with the thing that had killed his parents, and what he felt was not fear, not exactly, but something alive and focused and absolutely clear. "I've thought about you," Harry said. "For 6 years I've known about you and thought about what this moment might look like." He reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the stone, warm and slightly pulsing, extraordinary, the product of 600 years of impossible work. He held it but didn't show it. "You should know that." "Then you know I cannot be defeated by a child." "I don't want to defeat you," Harry said. "I want to make it very clear that I'm not afraid of you. Those are different things." He looked at Quirrell's face, at the wrongness of it, the doubled quality, the thing looking out from behind the eyes. "You killed my parents. I want you to know I know that, and I'm not going to let it make me into someone who can be managed by a man who was afraid of you, because that would mean you'd shaped me twice, once by what you did and once by everyone else's response to it. I'm not going to be shaped by you." The voice was quiet. In the silence, Harry could hear the stone's warmth against his palm. "You're going to touch me," he said to Quirrell. "You've decided to. I can see it in the way you're moving. I should tell you that when you do, something is going to happen that you won't be expecting, because the same protection that stopped you in my parents' house is still in my blood. I don't know exactly what it will do. But I'd think carefully." Quirrell lunged. What happened next was fast and absolute and painful in both directions. The burning spread from Harry's hands the moment Quirrell's skin touched his, and Quirrell's scream was not Quirrell's but the voice underneath Quirrell's, a sound that had nothing human in it. Harry held on through the burning because that had been his decision before the moment. "Hold on, don't let go, this protection is the weapon," and Quirrell's skin blistered and darkened under his hands and the screaming escalated. Then Quirrell collapsed. And then, from somewhere, something black and furious and cold swept through Harry like a migraine made of hate, and Harry had exactly enough time to think, "There's the exit," before the darkness swallowed everything. He woke up in the hospital wing. This was expected, Dumbledore's contingency, the safety net he'd certainly had in place. The infirmary smelled like potions and clean linen and Madame Pomfrey's particular brand of efficient sympathy, and the light through the windows was wrong for nighttime, which meant he'd been out for at least several hours. He lay still for a moment and took inventory, head aching, hands sore in the specific way of something that had been burned and healed, and, yes, the stone was gone from his pocket, which was fine. It had served its purpose. Dumbledore was sitting in the chair beside the bed. Harry turned his head to look at him. Dumbledore had his fingers steepled and his expression was warm and deeply attentive and had, underneath it, the quality of someone who had received a great deal of information today and was still organizing it. "You knew I'd go through," Harry said. "I thought you might," Dumbledore said. "You thought I'd have to," Harry said. "You thought the situation would escalate to the point where a student, specifically me, would need to intervene because the magical protections were designed for someone with specific qualities." "Harry, the mirror," Harry said. "The mirror shows you what you want most of all. The stone appears in the mirror to the person who wants to find it but not use it. That's a very specific magical architecture. Designed for someone with a very specific character." He paused. "Did you design it?" A pause. "Flamel and I designed it together," Dumbledore said. "For me specifically," Harry said. "For someone like you," Dumbledore said. "Someone pure of purpose. Someone you'd positioned to be here," Harry said. "In this school. With this specific character that was going to develop in a specific direction, because you'd placed me in an environment designed to produce it." His voice was not angry. It was patient and precise and had the quality of someone laying out a logical sequence. Except it didn't quite develop in the direction you expected, because the environment you placed me in was not the environment you expected it to be. Dumbledore looked at him with the eyes of someone encountering a new thing in a situation where they thought they knew all the things. "The Addams family," he said. "The Addams family," Harry agreed. "I've been looking into them," Dumbledore said, gently. "I should have known sooner. You didn't look because there was nothing concerning in the Muggle records and you expected me to arrive as the product of deprivation and rescue," Harry said. "A child who'd been in a cupboard for 10 years would be grateful, malleable, accustomed to adults making decisions, and deeply motivated by belonging." He paused. "You got me instead." The silence between them was not uncomfortable, exactly, but it was very full. "You're not what I expected," Dumbledore said. "I know," Harry said. Entry 1. "I beg your pardon." "Nothing," Harry said. He sat up carefully. His head protested, which he noted and set aside. "Quirrell is dead." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I'm sorry you had to." "I'm not," Harry said. "I'm sorry Voldemort's host is gone, but I'm not sorry the possession is ended." He looked at Dumbledore. "He'll find another body. Or find a way back without one. You should think about how to address that rather than managing how I feel about what happened in that room." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, "What do you need from me, Harry?" It was a different question than any he'd asked before. Not rhetorical. Not directed. An actual, open question from a man who had spent 50 years being the one who knew what everyone needed and was, for possibly the first time in a very long while, genuinely asking. Harry thought about it. "The truth," he said. "About the prophecy. About what was done on my behalf and why. About what you're planning and what role you've assigned me in it." He met the blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses directly. "I'm not going to cooperate with a plan I don't know about. But I might cooperate with an honest one." "I might," Dumbledore said, and something in his expression was the most genuine thing Harry had seen on his face all year. "Might," Harry said. "It's honest." "You are," Dumbledore said, after a long moment, "nothing like what I expected." "Good," Harry said. That was the whole point. Ron came to visit that evening with an enormous box of chocolate frogs and the specific energy of someone who had won a chess match under extremely dramatic circumstances and wanted very much to talk about it. Harry was glad to see him in a way that was simple and uncomplicated and had nothing strategic about it. "So?" Ron said, dropping into the chair. "How was the bit we didn't see?" "Interesting," Harry said. "Voldemort is alive and displaced and will come back at some point. Dumbledore and I had a conversation that may or may not lead somewhere useful. And I've written entry 36. Ron looked at the journal on the bed between them. "What is it?" Harry turned it to show him. "Entry 36, the conversation after the battle is as important as the battle. The battle ends things. The conversation shapes what comes next. Choose what you say afterward as carefully as what you do during." Ron read it. "Makes sense," he said. "What's 37? "Wednesday's holding it," Harry said. "Still?" "Still." Harry looked at the window, the evening light coming in warm and long, midsummer, the grounds below quiet. "She said I'd know when it was time for it. Has she been right about everything else?" Harry considered the year. Quirrell. The stone. Dumbledore's response. The letter he'd sent in March that had created the written record that had made the conversation in the hospital wing possible. The friends he'd made. The image he'd either failed or declined to be. "Yes," he said. Consistently. "Then she's probably right about 37 too," Ron said, with the comfortable certainty of someone who trusted the system because the system had worked. He handed Harry a chocolate frog. "Eat something. You look like you've been on fire." I was somewhat on fire, Harry said. Right, Ron said. So. Normal year, then. Harry laughed, which still had the quality of something he hadn't fully expected to be able to do, and ate the chocolate frog, and outside the long summer evening settled over Hogwarts like something that was almost, but not quite, an ending. It wasn't an ending. He knew that. But it was the end of the beginning, and he was, he thought, sitting in the hospital wing with the journal in his hand and one blank entry and one friend eating chocolate frogs beside him and the whole complicated living machinery of what came next already in motion, exactly who he'd meant to be. That was enough for now. Chapter 5, Letters of Complaint. The summer after first year smelled like Morticia's garden and gun oil and the very particular chemistry of whatever Pugsley was cooking in the basement, which changed daily but always had the same aromatic backbone of something that probably should not be combined with oxygen. Harry sat in the garden on a Sunday morning 3 weeks into July and read the letter from Hogwarts confirming second-year enrollment and felt nothing about it because he'd expected it and because the garden was doing something interesting to the light and he was busy watching it. Morticia's garden did not behave like gardens were supposed to behave, and Harry had stopped being surprised by this and started being interested in it somewhere in his second year living there, which had led to a thorough reading of everything botanical in the Addams library and a working friendship with 3 of the more aggressive plant species that Morticia described as the highest honor the garden could bestow. The plant currently closest to his chair extended something that was structurally a tendril and functionally a greeting. Harry acknowledged it without looking up from the letter. "Good morning," he said. The tendril withdrew, satisfied. Wednesday appeared at the garden door with 2 cups of tea and the expression she wore when she'd been thinking about something for long enough that she'd arrived at a conclusion and was ready to present it. She sat in the chair across from Harry and set his tea on the small iron table between them with the precise placement of someone who never did anything imprecisely, and she looked at the garden with the comfortable attention of someone who had grown up with it. "Tell me the rest of it," she said. Harry had told her most of it. He'd written every week, detailed letters that covered observation and action and the hospital wing conversation, but there was a remainder he'd been sitting with, something he couldn't quite articulate in a letter because it didn't have clean edges yet. "Dumbledore," he said. "What about him?" "I keep trying to decide what he is," Harry said. "I have all the evidence. I know what he did and why. I know the architecture of his planning. But the category won't settle." Wednesday drank her tea. "What categories have you tried?" "Villain. Too simple, he doesn't enjoy harm." Harry set the Hogwarts letter on the table. "Benevolent tyrant. Closer, but it makes him sound passive, and he's not passive, everything he does is active and intentional." He paused. "Father figure with impossible standards. Technically accurate but emotionally imprecise. He's a man who decided a long time ago that the safety of many people justified the management of a few," Wednesday said. "And he's been doing it long enough that he can no longer distinguish between his judgment and the truth." She looked at Harry. "The category you're looking for is probably true believer." Harry held that. "True believer," he said. "He believes in his cause the way religious people believe in doctrine," Wednesday said. "The belief is genuine. The cause is real. The problem is that genuine belief is immune to evidence that contradicts it. Evidence just gets reorganized into the belief system rather than challenging it." She paused. "When you refused to be what he expected, he didn't conclude that his expectations were wrong. He concluded that you were an interesting variation that the plan could accommodate." "He's already adjusting," Harry said. "The letter he sent after the hospital wing, I'll show you, it's warm, it's open, it's asking me questions about my life as if he's building the relationship from scratch. Which he is. Because the relationship he planned for didn't work. And you're wondering whether to let him build the new one." "I'm wondering what the new one would cost," Harry said. Wednesday was quiet for a moment. "A bee, or something shaped like a bee but slightly more angular than bees usually were, moved through the garden with the focused determination of something that had a very specific destination and was not interested in being scenic about it." Harry watched it. The new relationship, Wednesday said, is also a strategy. His new strategy is transparency, selective, managed transparency, giving you enough truth that you feel consulted, withholding enough that he retains the ability to direct. She paused. It's actually his best play. You respond to honesty. He knows that now. So when he gives me honesty, I should distrust it more than his deception. No, Wednesday said. You should receive it as what it is, a genuine attempt by a smart person to find a working dynamic with someone who outperformed their model. The honesty is real. The strategy behind the honesty is also real. Both things are true simultaneously. That's extremely inconvenient, Harry said. Most true things are, Wednesday said, which was a sentence she'd said in approximately 6 different forms over 6 years and which never got less accurate. The summer passed in the way of good summers, not quickly, but fully. Fencing with Gomez, who had developed 3 new combination attacks specifically for Harry's style and cried with pride when Harry countered all 3 on the 3rd day. Long afternoons in the map room with Wednesday going through everything Harry had learned in the first year and identifying the gaps. History of magic was a disaster, which they already knew, and the practical magic was good but needed the kind of systematic theory that Hogwarts apparently didn't prioritize in early years. Evenings with the whole family, which were loud and multilingual and included at least one argument per week that was never genuinely an argument because everyone in the house understood that disagreement was how the Addams family showed they were paying attention. And one very long conversation, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, where Harry told Wednesday everything he hadn't written, the moment in the final room, what it had felt like to hold on with his hands burning, what the cold sweep of Voldemort's passing had felt like, the specific texture of waking up in the hospital wing and knowing what the conversation with Dumbledore needed to be and having the clarity to have it. Wednesday listened to all of it without interrupting, which was the form of attention she reserved for things that mattered. When he finished, she said, "How do you feel about it?" "Complicated," he said. "Which I think is the correct feeling." "It is," she said. "Uncomplicated feelings about complicated events are usually wrong." "I keep thinking about his parents," Harry said. "My parents. What they knew, what they chose. My mother did something that the magic books can't fully explain, a sacrifice that created a protection that stopped the most powerful dark wizard in a century. The books call it love magic and move on, like naming it is the same as explaining it." "It isn't," Wednesday said. "It isn't," Harry agreed. "I want to understand it. Not the emotional component, I understand the emotional component. The actual magical mechanics. What she did and how it worked and whether it can be understood, because if it can be understood then maybe it can be used," Wednesday said. "Known," Harry said, with precision. "Understanding is different from use." Wednesday looked at him for a moment. Then she went to the shelf. The map room had shelves on 2 walls, a consistent collaborative accumulation of 6 years of reading, and pulled down a book Harry hadn't looked at since their 3rd year of lessons together. She put it on the table. "On the Mechanics of Sacrifice Magic," it said, in the handwriting of whoever had titled it, which was faded to near illegibility. It had no listed author. Harry opened it and read the first page and looked up at Wednesday. "How long have you had this?" he said. "Since your 2nd year living here," she said. "I was waiting until you asked the right question." He stopped. "Thought about it. That's very Wednesday of you." "Yes," she said, and sat back down, and they read it together in the rain. The Hogwarts Express for 2nd year had a different quality to it. Harry found it in the small adjustments, Ron greeting him on the platform with the ease of someone who'd been friends for a year and intended to keep being friends indefinitely, Hermione appearing with 3 new books she'd found over summer and a theory about something in the library she wanted to test, Neville with a new plant in a pot that he was carrying with such dedicated care that other students parted for it automatically. He also found it in himself, the difference between arriving somewhere for the first time, which required constant observation and calibration, and arriving somewhere you already knew, which freed the observation for the things that had changed. What had changed? the whisper network around his name had developed texture. Last year it had been pure recognition: Harry Potter, the boy who lived. This year it included addenda. Harry Potter, who figured out the stone. Harry Potter, who faced you-know-who and walked out. Harry Potter, who somehow isn't what anyone expected. The addenda were imprecise and variously wrong in their details, but their general direction was accurate, and Harry listened to them without comment and filed them. What else had changed? Draco Malfoy, who met him on the platform with the energy of someone who had spent a summer renegotiating something and arrived at a new position. Malfoy had been a consistent presence in first year, not hostile exactly, more like someone who had expected a particular dynamic and kept finding it unavailable. He'd wanted rivalry on his terms, which required Harry's participation in the rivalry, which Harry had declined to provide in favor of simple, consistent neutrality. The neutrality had done something interesting to Malfoy over a year. He'd cycled through several responses: contempt, which Harry didn't react to; provocation, which Harry didn't react to; performance for his friends, which Harry observed without reacting. And then, somewhere in the second half of first year, a kind of frustrated genuine interest that was probably the most honest thing about him. "Potter," Malfoy said, on the platform, falling into step beside him. "Malfoy," Harry said. "You dealt with the stone thing?" "Yes." "Slytherin has a bet running about what actually happened in there," Malfoy said. 17 different versions. "Which one are you betting on?" "The one where you walked in knowing exactly what you were doing," Malfoy said, with the directness of someone who had decided to stop performing. "Because that's what you do." Harry looked at him for a moment. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because my father has opinions about you," Malfoy said. "And I've been thinking about whether his opinions or my own observations are more reliable." "Which have you concluded?" Malfoy was quiet for a beat. "I'm still thinking," he said, which was substantially more honest than anything he'd said in their entire first year, and then he turned and walked back toward the Slytherin section of the platform, and Harry watched him go with the specific interest of someone noting an unexpected development. Ron appeared at his elbow. "Was Malfoy just having an original thought?" Harry said. "Possibly for the first time." "Should we be concerned?" "Interested," Harry said. "There's a difference." The castle received them with the specific welcome of familiar things, which is to say it didn't do anything different, but Harry noticed the differences in himself: the way the Great Hall felt like a place rather than a landmark, the way the moving staircases had become navigational features rather than obstacles, the way Hogwarts had the quality of a house that knew you were back. He noticed two new things at the staff table: a man in spectacular robes with dark wavy hair and the kind of extraordinary good looks that suggested either excellent genetics or a very committed enchantment, and an empty chair where Quirrell had sat, which was now occupied by a wizard Harry didn't recognize with the temporarily assigned energy of someone sitting in a seat that wasn't theirs yet. The spectacular man was Gilderoy Lockhart, which Harry knew from the Defense Against the Dark Arts book list, all 7 items on which were books by Lockhart, which had been the summer's first significant data point. He had the eyes of someone who had spent a long time being looked at and had organized his entire personality around managing the looking. Harry watched him work the staff table with the professional charm of a man who was genuinely excellent at social performance, and watched what the performance concealed with the specific attention of someone who'd spent 6 years learning the difference. What it concealed, Harry noted, was not malice. It was absence. The extraordinary confidence was paper over something much more uncertain, and the smile that reached toward everyone in the room was the smile of someone who needed the room to love them and had gotten good enough at producing that response that they no longer noticed the need. "He's famous," Hermione said, from his right, and her voice had the note it got when she was deploying factual enthusiasm as a way of organizing something she wasn't entirely sure about. "He's written a lot about himself," Harry said. "All 7 books. The central figure in every story is Lockhart." "That's because he," Hermione paused. "He did do all those things. The books are documented." "Documented by him," Harry said. "In books he wrote about himself." He looked at her gently. I'm not saying he's lying. I'm saying that self-documentation is a specific kind of source and should be read as one. Hermione's expression moved through several positions quickly: the instinct to defend the source, the logical recognition of Harry's point, the slightly uncomfortable landing of someone who prized knowledge and was being asked to apply skepticism to something she wanted to be true. "He might be exactly what he says he is," she said. "He might be," Harry agreed. "We'll know more in a month." They knew more in a month. Lockhart was, as a teacher, the most extraordinary waste of a classroom Harry had encountered. Not because he was malicious, the quirrell malice had been at least interesting to observe, but because the class was entirely organized around Lockhart rather than the students, every lesson a vehicle for another story, every story featuring Lockhart in a position of dashing triumph, every actual magical content question deflected with a smile and a reference to Chapter 4 of whichever autobiography. Harry sat through it with the patience of someone who had learned to find educational value in everything including absence of content, and noted the specific ways Lockhart's performance wobbled, the overcorrection when challenged, the slightly too fast smoothing over of anything that might reveal the gap between the story and the underlying competence. On a Wednesday morning in October, Lockhart asked Harry to demonstrate a wand movement in front of the class, which was Lockhart's standard method of involving students in a way that kept them as props rather than participants. Harry stood up, performed the movement with the clean economy of someone who'd been doing wand work seriously for a year, and heard Lockhart say, "Excellent form, Harry, just a touch of additional flourish at the end, like this," he demonstrated. The flourish was wrong. Technically, mechanically wrong, the wrist angle producing a twist that would redirect the spell rather than amplify it. Harry looked at it. He looked at Lockhart. He said, pleasantly, "That flourish redirects the casting angle by about 15 degrees. It would miss the target." The class went very quiet. Lockhart's smile remained perfectly intact. "Ah, well, there are several valid variations. The textbooks, including yours, show the standard movement without the flourish," Harry said. "Are you recommending a deviation from the standard, or was that an error?" The smile flickered. Recovered. "An excellent question, Harry. The beauty of advanced practice is that one develops one's own style, right?" Harry said, and sat down. Hermione caught his eye across the room with an expression that said she had been thinking something similar for 6 weeks and was simultaneously relieved and anxious that he'd said it. Ron, beside him, was extremely focused on his desk. Neville was looking at his hands with the air of someone who was present at something interesting and was trying to be invisible about it. After class, in the corridor, Hermione said, "You know Lockhart is going to, he won't do anything," Harry said. "He needs the class to like him. Repercussions would make him look petty. He might tell Dumbledore." "He might," Harry said. "That's fine." Ron said, "I feel like you enjoy this slightly too much." "I don't enjoy being rude to people," Harry said, which was true. "I enjoy being accurate. Those are different things." "The way you're accurate is very rude," Ron said, with complete fondness. The Chamber of Secrets announced itself, as things at Hogwarts tended to announce themselves, obliquely and with maximum atmosphere. The first message on the wall: "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the Air, beware," appeared in November, and Harry stood in front of it with the petrified cat hanging from a torch bracket and felt several things simultaneously: genuine concern about Mrs. Norris, considerable interest in the message's specific phrasing, and the creeping recognition of something he'd read once in the Hogwarts, a history gap analysis he'd done in first year. He'd written to Wednesday about Salazar Slytherin's legend in October of first year. He'd read about the chamber in a reference text that didn't use the name directly but described a hidden location within the castle, a legacy project, a specific kind of creature associated with Slytherin's descendant line. "I can hear it," he said, very quietly. "What?" Ron said. "In the walls. There's something moving in the walls." Harry tilted his head. The sound was there, low, rhythmic, directional. "It's speaking." "The wall is speaking," Hermione said. Not the wall, Harry said. Something in the pipes. Something large. He straightened up. I know what it is. They looked at him. Basilisk, he said. Ron made a sound. The heir of Slytherin is a myth built on Salazar Slytherin's literal project, Harry said. He built a chamber. He put a basilisk in it. The heir controls it through Parseltongue, which is the snake language, which I speak, which I should probably mention is relevant here. You can hear it because you're a Parselmouth, Hermione said. Yes. I've been able to hear it since September. I thought it was pipes. Harry, Ron said slowly. Could you, with the Parseltongue, could you, control the basilisk? Harry said. Probably not. Parselmouth isn't a radio signal, it's a language. I can speak to it, potentially communicate, but I can't command it the way the heir can because the heir's control isn't linguistic, it's tied to the bloodline magic. He paused. What I can do is understand what it's saying. What's it saying? Hermione said. Hunt, Harry said. It's saying hunt. Over and over, in different directions. Whatever channel it's being given its orders through, the order is always the same. The attacks progress through November and December, petrifications mounting, the school growing anxious, the staff visibly concerned in the specific way of people who were trying not to communicate their concern to students while being entirely visible to anyone paying attention. Harry paid attention. He tracked every attack by location and timeline and worked out the pipe system, mapped the routes the basilisk was using, identified the pattern in the timing. He also identified the heir of Slytherin in early December, which he managed through a combination of library research into the known Slytherin bloodline descendants, the specific phrasing of the wall messages which carried the stylistic register of someone very young performing very old, and the memory of a diary he'd seen in Ginny Weasley's cauldron in Diagon Alley, a slim black book of specific vintage with a name on the cover that he'd noted and filed. Tom Marvolo Riddle, the diary had said. He'd looked up the name when he got home from Diagon Alley, because he always looked up names, and found, Tom Riddle, outstanding student, first in his year, head boy, awarded special award for services to the school, class of 1945. Year of graduation, the same year the chamber was last opened. Year of graduation, the same year a student died and a groundskeeper named Hagrid was expelled. He sat with this for 3 days, because it was the kind of information that required sitting with, because its full implications took time to map. Then he wrote it all down in a careful, 12-page document and he went to see Dumbledore. This was a Thursday afternoon in December, 1 week before Christmas holidays, and Dumbledore received him with the warmth and engagement he'd been applying to Harry since the hospital wing conversation, the new dynamic, the honest one, the one that was also a strategy. Harry sat across from the enormous desk and presented the document and waited while Dumbledore read it. Dumbledore read 12 pages in approximately 4 minutes, which said something about his reading speed and also about how long he'd been thinking about the same problem. He set it down. He looked at Harry. Tom Riddle, Dumbledore said. Tom Riddle is Voldemort, Harry said. The name is an anagram. I worked it out. He was a student here 50 years ago. He opened the chamber then, too. He framed Hagrid for it, which I believe you knew. A pause. I had suspicions, Dumbledore said. I couldn't prove, he's back, Harry said. Not the way he came back in Quirrell. The diary is a piece of him, a memory, or something more than a memory, something with enough of his will in it to act. It's been influencing a student. He paused. I believe it's Ginny Weasley. She's been writing in the diary and it's been writing back, and the diary has been using her to open the chamber and direct the basilisk. Dumbledore was very still. The diary needs to be destroyed, Harry said. The basilisk needs to be dealt with. And Ginny Weasley is a victim in this, not a perpetrator. She didn't know what she was doing. Harry, Dumbledore said, quietly. How did you determine all of this? I read everything. I paid attention to everyone. I mapped the pipe routes and tracked the attack timeline and looked up Tom Riddle's school record and connected it to the diary I saw in Diagon Alley. He paused. I've been doing this since September. You've been, Dumbledore stopped. Started again. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I wasn't certain until 2 days ago, Harry said. I don't bring uncertainties. I bring documented conclusions. There was a long silence. Outside, the December sky had gone the dark grey of late afternoon, and the castle's torches had started their evening routine of brightening, and Fawkes the Phoenix on his perch made a soft sound that was not quite music but was related to it. What would you like to do? Dumbledore said, and it had the quality it had had in the hospital wing, the genuine asking, the open question. I'd like you to act on this information and not put me in a position where I have to go into the chamber myself, Harry said. I'm 12 years old and there is a basilisk in the pipes. I'd like the adults with the institutional power and the capability to handle it, with me as a resource and an informant, not as the primary agent. Something moved across Dumbledore's face. You're asking me to do my job, he said. Yes, Harry said. That's what I'm asking. Another long silence. I will, Dumbledore said. I want to be clear, I intend to. Tonight. He looked at Harry steadily. And I want to say something. What you've done here, the observation, the documentation, the reasoning, it's extraordinary. Not just for a 12-year-old. For anyone. My sister taught me to think, Harry said. Wednesday, Dumbledore said. He'd been asking about Wednesday carefully, systematically, all year, small questions in small moments, the intelligence gathering of a man who understood that what he hadn't predicted about Harry had a source. Yes, Harry said. I'd like to meet her, Dumbledore said. She knows, Harry said. She's been waiting for you to ask. Dumbledore went to the chamber that night. He went with several aurors from the Ministry and Professor McGonagall, and what Harry could only assume was the full application of a century's worth of magical capability, because by morning the school knew that the chamber had been found and entered and the basilisk neutralized and Ginny Weasley had been recovered from the chamber itself, pale and frightened and completely unharmed. The diary had been destroyed. Ron burst into the common room at 7 in the morning looking like someone had run him through an accelerated emotional range. Ginny's okay, he said, and his voice had the specific compressed quality of someone who'd been terrified for several hours and was only now beginning to process the resolution. She's in the hospital wing, she's fine. She's okay. Good, Harry said, from the chair where he'd been awake for the last 2 hours. I told you she would be. You told me, Harry, you've been up all night. I was thinking. About what? About why Voldemort put a piece of himself in a diary 50 years ago, Harry said. About what it means that pieces of him can exist separately. About whether there are more of them. Ron stared at him. More pieces. It's a theory, Harry said. I need more research. He stood up. Go see Ginny. I'll come by the hospital wing later. Ron looked at him with the expression he got sometimes, the one that had evolved over a year and a half from the original "this is unusual" into something more like affectionate certainty, and said, "You are the most alarming person I've ever been friends with." "Thank you," Harry said. That wasn't entirely a compliment. "I know," Harry said. It was still accurate. The Board of Governors removed Dumbledore from Hogwarts in May. Harry had known it was coming, not the specifics, but the general shape of it. Dumbledore's support of the students and his active engagement over the chamber business had made him inconvenient to certain people, and inconvenient people in positions of institutional power had predictable enemies. He'd watched the political pressure building in the Owl Post, in the way certain students talked about their parents' opinions, in the specific tightening of certain teachers' expressions when ministry policy was discussed. When it happened on a Tuesday afternoon, and the school knew by dinner, and the mood in the Great Hall was the mood of a place that had just realized something load-bearing had been removed. Harry ate his dinner. He thought about the situation. He thought about Dolores Umbridge's name on the list of ministry officials currently scrutinizing Hogwarts, about the board member Lucius Malfoy whose name appeared in the same sentence as the diary's ownership chain, about the fact that Dumbledore being removed was a specific kind of win for a specific kind of person. He thought about the difference between being glad Dumbledore was gone and being concerned about what came next. He found, to his mild surprise, that he was considerably more concerned about the second than pleased about the first. He wrote to Wednesday that evening. Dumbledore's been removed. The Board of Governors voted him out. Lucius Malfoy is involved, which is the same Malfoy who provided Ginny Weasley with the diary, the one that turned out to be a piece of Voldemort. So Malfoy gave a child a dark artifact that possessed her and then engineered the removal of the one person capable of handling the consequences. The diary was the plan all along. The chamber business was meant to destabilize the school. Dumbledore was the actual target. I find myself in the strange position of having spent a year and a half dismantling Dumbledore's management of me and now discovering that the people who want Dumbledore gone are people I find considerably more objectionable than Dumbledore. I don't know what to do with this. Wednesday's reply came in 2 days. You're discovering the difference between your relationship with a person and their position in the world. The two are separate things. Dumbledore's management of you is a problem in your relationship with him. His presence at Hogwarts is a structural fact about the school that affects everyone. One of these you're actively addressing. The other is a separate category. The fact that your obstacle is also a load-bearing wall is information, not a contradiction. Update your model. Entry 28. Know when the enemy of your obstacle is worse than your obstacle. Act accordingly. Harry stared at that last line. He turned to the journal, found page 28. Entry 28 was one Wednesday had written over summer, in the margins of a longer conversation about strategic patience, and it said, in her handwriting, the enemy of your obstacle is not automatically your ally. Identify what they want from the obstacle's removal before you decide whether to help or hinder. He held the journal for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done before. He went to McGonagall's office. He knocked. She opened the door with the expression she reserved for students arriving at unconventional times for unconventional reasons, evaluative, sharp, not unkind. Mr. Potter, she said. Professor, he said. May I come in? She stepped back. He came in. He sat in the chair across from her desk, which smelled like parchment and discipline and the very faint trace of something floral that Harry had never identified and suspected McGonagall would consider irrelevant to mention. I know who put the diary in Ginny Weasley's cauldron, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy. I can't prove it definitively, but I have the inference chain and the circumstantial evidence, and I believe with the diary gone, the physical evidence is gone too. But the person who did it is the same person who organized the board vote against Dumbledore. McGonagall looked at him. I'm not telling you this because I want Dumbledore reinstated, Harry said carefully. I'm telling you because you should know that his removal was engineered by someone who introduced a dark artifact into the school that possessed a student. The political action and the criminal action are from the same source. You have documentation, McGonagall said. It was not a question. I always have documentation, Harry said. He put the 8-page summary on her desk. She read it. She read it very carefully, which meant she read it completely, and Harry waited with the patient ease of someone accustomed to waiting because they'd already done their part. When she finished, she set it down on the desk and looked at it for a moment and then looked at Harry with an expression that had several things in it: assessment, something that was not quite surprise but was its older cousin, and underneath everything, a warmth that McGonagall kept banked and practical and never wasted on performance. You're 12 years old, she said. Almost 13, Harry said. Almost 13, she said. She looked at the document again. I'm going to need you to understand that what you've given me here, the reasoning, the inference chain, it will not survive as formal evidence. But it will inform how certain conversations happen. I know, Harry said. That's why I brought it to you and not the ministry. She looked at him sharply. Why not the ministry? Because the ministry has Lucius Malfoy in its social infrastructure, Harry said. And because formal channels for this specific situation would be controlled by people who benefit from the formal channels producing nothing. McGonagall was quiet for a long moment. Where did you learn to think like this? My sister, Harry said, for what felt like the 100th time. Wednesday Addams, McGonagall said, with the tone of someone who had been researching the name since September of last year and had found the research both illuminating and deeply strange. Yes, Harry said. I'd like to meet her, McGonagall said. She's coming for Christmas, Harry said. She always comes for Christmas. McGonagall nodded, slowly. She picked up the document and put it in her desk drawer with the deliberate care of something being filed rather than discarded. She folded her hands on the desk. Is there anything else? One thing, Harry said. When Dumbledore comes back, he will come back, McGonagall said, with the flat certainty of someone who had seen Dumbledore handle things that should have broken him and watched him redirect rather than break. When he does, Harry said, I'd appreciate it if you mentioned the document to him. Not as a threat. As context. You want him to know you identified the problem before it was formally identified. I want him to know the documentation exists, Harry said. And that I gave it to you rather than using it in any other way. McGonagall studied him. That's a very deliberate choice of action, she said. Yes, Harry said. You're establishing trust, she said. With me and through me. I'm establishing that I act in good faith when good faith is the right action, Harry said. There's a difference between trust and reliability. I'm not asking anyone to trust me, I'm building a record of reliable behavior so that trust becomes a reasonable conclusion rather than an assumption. The silence in McGonagall's office was the silence of someone who had spent 40 years reading students and was doing a very careful reading right now. Entry 36, Harry said quietly, almost to himself. McGonagall looked at him. Something my sister wrote, he said. The conversation after the battle shapes what comes next. He stood. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Potter, she said, as he reached the door. He turned. You are, she said, with the compressed feeling of someone who chose their words as carefully as they spent money, going to be either the most valuable ally this school has ever had or the most interesting problem it's ever produced. Possibly both simultaneously. My father said something similar, Harry said. He cried when he said it. I won't be crying, McGonagall said. I know, Harry said. That's how I know you mean it. He went back to the common room. The fire was low, late evening, most people in bed, only a few fifth years still wrestling with their OWL preparation. He sat down and took out the journal and looked at the 2 remaining blank pages. Entry 36 was filled. It had been filled since the hospital wing last year. The conversation after the battle is as important as the battle. Entry 37 was Wednesday's. Blank, held, waiting. He turned to the page between them, the letter from Wednesday, folded in, the one that had the line about Dumbledore being an obstacle and not an enemy. He reread it. Then he took out a fresh piece of parchment and wrote, Wednesday. He's been removed. I think the thing I'm learning this year is that the work is longer than the journal. The journal was always the education, you said that. But education ends and work doesn't. The work is ongoing and it changes shape as you understand it better and the understanding keeps going. I think what I'm building here, the documentation, the relationships, the record of reliable behavior, I think it's the thing after the journal. The thing the journal was preparing me for. Is entry 37 for when that thing begins? He sent it. The reply came 5 days later, the last Friday before the Christmas holidays, and it was a single sentence. Yes. And below that, in her smallest and most deliberate handwriting, come home and I'll tell you what it says. Harry held the letter. Around him the common room was filling with the chaotic relief of end of term, people laughing, practicing holiday plans, releasing the accumulated pressure of a year that had included petrifications and a basilisk and a board of governors vote and approximately 7 other things that were too complicated for a standard school year. Ron dropped into the chair across from him. "You've got the thinking face," he said. "I have information about entry 37, Harry said. Ron had, over 2 years, become entirely conversant with the journal as a framework. He looked at Harry with the engaged attention of someone who understood what that meant. "What is it?" "I don't know yet," Harry said. "I have to go home to find out." Ron nodded. He looked at the fire. "Whatever it is," he said, "we're going to help. Me and Hermione and Neville." He said it with the complete ease of someone stating something so obvious it barely needed saying. "You know that, right? It's not just you doing this." Harry looked at him. At the 3 years of consistent, uncomplicated, entirely reliable presence that was Ron Weasley, who had never needed strategies for friendship because friendship was simply what he did, naturally and without management. "I know," Harry said. He meant it completely. Outside, the first real snow of December was starting, and the castle's lights were warm in the windows, and Harry Potter sat in the Gryffindor common room with 36 entries filled and 1 entry waiting and the specific feeling of someone who was standing exactly at the point where preparation becomes something else. He was ready to find out what the something else was. Chapter 6, the last entry. Wednesday arrived at Hogwarts on the 23rd of December. She did not arrive by the conventional means available to Hogwarts visitors. She did not take the night bus, did not hire a carriage, did not appear through the flue in McGonagall's office the way Hermione's parents had arrived briefly in November for a parents' evening that Hermione had described as the most anxiety-producing 2 hours of her academic life. Wednesday Addams arrived at the front gates of Hogwarts in the late afternoon in a black coat that reached her ankles, with her hair in its 2 plaits and a single small bag in the composed unhurried manner of someone who had walked exactly as far as they'd intended and arrived exactly when they meant to. The gates opened for her. Harry, who had been watching from the top of the front steps since 4 o'clock, watched them open and felt the specific warmth that he'd been feeling every time she appeared since he was 5 years old, the warmth of a fixed point. She walked up the path and he came down the steps and they met in the middle and she looked at him with the complete inventory look she always used first and then she said, "You're taller." 2 inches since August, he said. "Your shoulders are different," she said. "Fencing," he said. "I've been using the practice room on 3rd floor when it's empty." She absorbed this with the nod she used for information that confirmed something she'd already theorized. She looked up at the castle, at its towers and its windows and its very particular architectural confidence, the building language of something that had been here long enough to have opinions about the landscape. "It's exactly what I expected," she said, which, from Wednesday, was the highest possible architectural compliment. "Come on," Harry said. "McGonagall wants to meet you. She's been patient about it for 3 months, which I think is the most restrained she's been about anything all year." "What did you tell her about me?" "Nothing that wasn't true," Harry said. "Which I think is the thing that made her curious." They went inside. The castle was nearly empty, the skeleton crew of students who'd stayed for Christmas scattered across the common rooms and the library, the staff present but quieter, the whole building in the reduced volume state that Harry had come to associate with the best thinking he did all year. He'd spent the 4 days since term ended reading and mapping and preparing the conversation he was going to have with Wednesday, because even after 8 years of knowing her, he still prepared for important conversations the way he'd learned to prepare for everything, thoroughly, and with the genuine humility of someone who knew they didn't have the whole picture yet. McGonagall's office received them at 4:30. McGonagall stood when they came in, which was not something she did for students, and she looked at Wednesday with the focused assessment she usually reserved for students doing something she wasn't sure yet was brilliant or catastrophic. Wednesday looked back at her with the complete attentiveness she gave to people she found worth her time. "Professor McGonagall," Harry said. "Wednesday Addams." A silence that had the quality of 2 people taking each other's precise measure. Miss Addams, McGonagall said. Professor, Wednesday said. Harry has told me you're the load-bearing wall of this institution. McGonagall blinked. I don't believe he used those words. He didn't, Wednesday said. That's my interpretation of what he described. McGonagall looked at Harry. Harry looked at the middle distance in the manner of someone who had known this meeting was going to be interesting and was comfortable with that fact. McGonagall looked back at Wednesday. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile but was clearly a close relative of one making a brief visit. Sit down, McGonagall said. They sat. McGonagall poured tea with the focused efficiency of someone who used the ritual of it to organize her thoughts, and she handed Wednesday a cup and said, He tells me you've been preparing him since he was 5. We've been preparing each other, Wednesday said. He taught me things I didn't know I needed to learn. Such as? Wednesday held her teacup with both hands and looked at it for a moment. That courage and darkness aren't the same thing, she said. I knew darkness. He showed me something different, a kind of lightness that coexists with difficulty. He finds things funny that I would find merely accurate. McGonagall received this. He laughs, she said. He laughs, Wednesday confirmed. I've been told that's remarkable. In our family, Harry said, laughing is basically a personality quirk. In our family, Wednesday said, it's a philosophical position. McGonagall looked between them with the expression of someone who had been a teacher for 40 years and had just encountered a calibration problem of unusual interest. She set her teacup down. Miss Addams, she said. Are you aware of the full scope of what Harry is involved in? Yes, Wednesday said. The prophecy. Voldemort's return. The larger picture. Yes, Wednesday said again, and then, are you? McGonagall was still for a moment. I know more of it than Dumbledore believes I know, Wednesday said. I've been researching wizarding politics and magical history for 8 years. I'm not a witch, I don't have access to certain sources. But I'm thorough, and I'm patient, and the Muggle record of the magical world is surprisingly informative if you know how to read it. She paused. Dumbledore's plan for Harry, the broad shape of it, it ends badly. Not for the obvious reason. What's the obvious reason? McGonagall said carefully. That it requires Harry to die, Wednesday said. The office was very quiet. Harry was looking at Wednesday. He had suspected this. He had read the sacrifice magic book she'd given him. He had run the logic of the prophecy, which Dumbledore had finally shared with him in full at the end of first year, neither can live while the other survives, and he had followed it to its mathematical conclusion and then set it aside because the conclusion required data he didn't have yet. He had been waiting, specifically, for this conversation. For Wednesday to be in the same room and to say the thing clearly. The protection my mother created, he said. It's in my blood. If Voldemort returns in a real body and kills me, the protection transfers. It saturates the field, Wednesday said. The sacrifice replicates the original. Anyone who dies by Voldemort's hand, willingly, as a protective act, creates the same effect. Your mother's magic didn't just save you. It created a template. She looked at Harry steadily. Dumbledore knows this. He has known it since you were a baby. His plan, the long plan, the one that's been running since he placed you with the Dursleys, requires you to walk into Voldemort's wand when the time comes. McGonagall made a sound. Prepared, Wednesday said. Knowing. Not as a victim, as a willing sacrifice. That's the distinction. It only works if you choose it. She paused. That's why the deprivation had to be managed carefully. Too much and you'd arrive broken, incapable of the courage required. Too little and you'd arrive with enough self-regard to refuse. He needed you exactly shaped, brave enough to walk in, humble enough not to question, trusting enough to believe he would tell you only when it was necessary. He wanted me malleable, Harry said. He wanted you heroic, Wednesday said. There's a specific kind of heroism he needed, the self-abnegating kind. The kind that says my life is less important than the lives of others, let me give it. She looked at him. It's not wrong, exactly. It's a real moral position. It's just one he needed to be the conclusion you arrived at, rather than one he told you directly, because directly told it becomes a demand rather than a virtue. McGonagall stood up. She walked to her window and stood with her back to them for a moment, looking out at the grounds, and Harry could see from her posture the specific quality of someone reorganizing something fundamental. He waited. Does he know you know? McGonagall said, without turning. Not the full scope, Harry said. He knows I'm more informed than he expected. He doesn't know how much of the endpoint I've worked out. McGonagall turned back. Her face had the expression it had when she was making a decision she found both necessary and personally costly. What are you going to do? She said, and she directed it at Harry, but she was also directing it at Wednesday, because they were, she had realized over the course of this conversation, not two people presenting information sequentially but a single strategic unit that happened to have two bodies. I'm going to go home for Christmas, Harry said. And I'm going to read entry 37. McGonagall looked at the journal in Harry's inner pocket. She couldn't see it from there, but she knew it was there because Harry had referenced it twice and McGonagall did not require information to be repeated. The journal, she said. The last entry, Harry said. Wednesday's been holding it. McGonagall looked at Wednesday. Wednesday looked at McGonagall. Something passed between them that Harry thought was probably the recognition of two people who operated from a position of genuine competence and genuine care and were therefore, at the fundamental level, on the same side. If the plan changes, McGonagall said quietly. If there's a way to, there might be, Harry said. That's what we're working out. She nodded. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The nod was the most complete form of McGonagall's communication and contained multitudes. They left the office. The corridor outside was torchlit and empty and the castle hummed around them in its winter key, quieter and lower than its term-time voice. Wednesday walked beside Harry with the unhurried pace she always used, and neither of them spoke for the length of a corridor and a staircase. Then Wednesday said, "How long have you known?" "Since the summer," Harry said. "The Sacrifice Magic Book. I ran the logic in September and then I ran it again in November and the answer was the same both times." "And you didn't write to tell me?" "I wrote to ask you about entry 37, Harry said. "Because I knew that what you'd written was the response to that specific conclusion. You'd had the same conclusion before I did." "Last Christmas," Wednesday said. "I was going to tell you then and you weren't ready." Harry didn't argue with this. He'd learned, over years, that Wednesday's assessments of his readiness were not patronizing but accurate. She knew the difference between withholding something because it served her and withholding something because it served him, and she had never done the former. "I'm ready now," he said. "Yes," she said. They went to the room he used when he stayed at Hogwarts over holidays, his dormitory, emptied of everyone else, with its 5 beds and its quiet and Gerald's box on his nightstand. Gerald was quite old by Spider standards and moved more slowly than he once had, but he turned in his box when Harry came in and Thursday had the quality of enormous slow dignity, and Harry touched the glass and said something in the low sound that was almost but not quite Parseltongue. It was Gerald's language, which was different, which Harry had never tried to name. Wednesday sat in the chair by the window. Harry sat on his bed facing her. He reached into his inner pocket and took out the journal. He set it on the bed between them, and the lamplight touched its worn cover, the slim black notebook that had started on an airplane when he was 5 and had been filled across 8 years and 13 countries and 6 dormitory beds and 1 kitchen table in Surrey and the map room and 3 different libraries and a hospital wing. "Tell me," he said. Wednesday took the journal. She opened it to the last blank page. She picked up his pen from the nightstand. She held the pen and looked at the blank page for a long moment with the expression of someone who had been composing this for a long time and was now writing it down. She wrote. She handed it back. He read it. He read it twice. He looked up at her. "That's it," he said. "That's it," she said. The entry was 12 words, and they were the truest 12 words he'd read in any of the 36 entries before them. Entry 37, the answer was never death. It was always choice. He held the journal and read it again and felt something move through him that was not relief, exactly, and not resolution, but the specific sensation of something that had been running in the background of his thinking since September, finally reaching the front and declaring itself clearly. "The sacrifice only works if it's chosen," he said. "That's the mechanism. The choosing is the magic." "Yes," Wednesday said. "Dumbledore needed it to be chosen but not questioned," Harry said. "He needed me to choose it on my own terms, which required not knowing it was the plan until the moment it became the only option. He was working it out as he spoke, which was how he did his best thinking, aloud, in front of someone he trusted to interrupt if he went wrong. But choice that's been engineered is still choice. He wasn't going to tell me until the last moment because if I knew too early, I might choose differently." "Or he thought you would," Wednesday said. "He doesn't know what you'd choose if you knew." "Neither do I," Harry said. Wednesday looked at him directly. "Yes you do," she said. "You've known since you read the Sacrifice Magic book. You made the calculation. You arrived at the conclusion. You wrote to me asking about entry 37 because you knew entry 37 was the thing that changed the calculation, and you'd already decided what you wanted the calculation to be before you asked." Harry was quiet for a long time. Outside, the December dark had come down fully, and the grounds below were white with the first proper snow of Christmas, and the castle was warm and present around them. "Tell me what I decided," he said. "You decided," Wednesday said, "that you would choose, if it came to that, freely, fully informed, and on your own terms. Not because Dumbledore needed you to. Not because a plan required it. Because you would look at the situation completely and conclude that the choice was right." She paused. "And entry 37 is the reminder that the choice being right doesn't mean the plan that led you to it was right. You can arrive at a correct conclusion through a flawed process. You can do the right thing for someone who was manipulating you. Those things can both be true." "And then?" Harry said. "And then you make sure it doesn't happen that way," Wednesday said. "You take the choice back. You make it yours. You tell Dumbledore that you know, and you tell him that if that moment comes, you will choose it, but you will choose it because you chose it. Not because he managed you into it. You remove the manipulation and keep the choice." "That ends his plan," Harry said. "It ends his version of the plan," Wednesday said. "The plan that required you not to know. But the actual strategic objective, defeating Voldemort completely, closing the connection, destroying every piece of him, that's still achievable. You just achieve it differently, because you know what's in it." "He's going to hate that," Harry said. "Not hate, he doesn't hate. He's going to find it extremely inconvenient and genuinely concerning, and he's going to try to manage the new situation the same way he's managed everything." "Yes," Wednesday said. "Which is why you're not going to let him have the conversation on his terms." "How do I stop?" "You write him a letter," Wednesday said. "Tonight. Before Christmas, before the new term, before he has the opportunity to set the context. You write him a letter in which you lay out what you know, what you've concluded, and what your position is. You send it so that the letter exists before any conversation begins." She paused. "The letter is entry 7, entry 11, entry 19, and entry 32 simultaneously. You control what is asked. You follow his rules exactly until you don't. You're already the one who knows. You send it before the arrival so the arrival can't be framed as your response to his framing." Harry picked up the pen. He wrote for 2 hours. It was not the most difficult letter he'd ever written, that had been the letter about the stone, which had required precision under urgency, but it was the most consequential. He wrote 4 drafts, and Wednesday sat in her chair through all 4 of them, reading when he passed pages to her and marking what was imprecise and returning them without editorial comment. The 5th draft was the letter. It was 6 pages, and it was measured and clear and contained no accusation, because accusation was theater and this was documentation, and it laid out, with the calm completeness of a 12-page summary, exactly what Harry knew, how he knew it, what he'd concluded, and what he intended. The final paragraph read, "I intend to face Voldemort when the time comes. I intend to do so fully informed and by my own choice, not as the product of your engineering but as a person who has assessed the situation and decided. I am not asking your permission. I am informing you that the choice is mine, that I've made it, and that you are relieved of the responsibility of managing me toward it. I expect, in exchange, full information going forward. Not selected information. Not information at the moment you judge I need it. All of it. If you can agree to this, I think we can work together effectively. If you can't, I'll work without you, and I'll be fine either way. I want to be clear that the second option is not a threat. It's a genuine statement of capability. I respect what you've built. I respect what you've protected. I respect that your care for people is real, even when the methods it produces are not. I'm asking you to apply the same respect to me. Harry James Potter Addams." He sealed it. He addressed it to Dumbledore, personal, not school correspondence. He sent it with the owl that wasn't watched, his own owl now, a different one from the one that had been tracked in second year, acquired at the Ollery in September specifically for this purpose. Then he and Wednesday went downstairs and had dinner in the half-empty Great Hall with Ron and the handful of other students who'd stayed, and the conversation was about nothing consequential, Ron's Christmas plans, a Quidditch team Ron followed with the devotion of a second religion, a letter from Pugsley that Harry had received that morning and which contained a drawing of Captain Flint the Beetle and 3 lines of very excited chemistry notation that Ron looked at and said, "I have no idea what any of this means, but it's clearly good news." "Very good news," Harry said. "If he's done what I think he's done with the secondary reaction, he's solved the problem that's been in the Addams laboratory for 11 years. "How old is your brother?" Ron said. 14, Harry said. "Right," Ron said. "Normal." After dinner, in the common room, Hermione appeared from behind a stack of books she'd been inhabiting since Monday and looked at Wednesday with the expression she used for meeting people she'd already formed extensive opinions about based on available evidence. "You're Wednesday," she said. "You're Hermione," Wednesday said. "Harry's told me a great deal about you," Hermione said. "He's told me more about you," Wednesday said, which made Hermione blink. "Has he?" "He says you're the best reader he's encountered," Wednesday said. "That you process information faster than anyone he knows but that you trust institutional sources more than the evidence sometimes warrants." She paused. "He says you're working on the second part." Hermione looked at Harry with an expression that was half mortification and half the specific alert of someone who has just received accurate feedback from an unexpected direction. "Is that true?" Wednesday said. "He also says you're going to be important. Not as a supporting character in someone else's story. As your own thing." She looked at Hermione with the direct appraisal she used for people she'd decided were worth her full attention. "That's rarer than it sounds. Most people are supporting characters in their own stories. He sees you as a main one." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He said that." His exact words were, "Hermione doesn't know yet how much of this is hers to shape." Wednesday glanced at Harry. He was writing in the margins of his notes. "He thought I couldn't see." "I knew you could see," Harry said. "I know," Wednesday said. "That's why you left it." Ron was looking between all 3 of them with the expression of someone who had arrived at a party that was already deeply in progress. "Right," he said. "So. This is," Wednesday, Harry said. Yeah, Ron said. Got that. He looked at Wednesday with his natural, uncomplicated directness. He talks about you like you taught him everything. He learned everything, Wednesday said. There's a difference. Ron appeared to give this its due consideration. He also talks about you like you're the scariest person he knows, he said. I'm not the scariest person he knows, Wednesday said. I'm the most reliable. She paused. The scariest person he knows is Morticia. She made an entire garden that has opinions. Ron looked at Harry. Your mother's garden has opinions. Strong ones, Harry said. Don't touch the black roses. I wasn't planning to touch any of them, Ron said. Good, Harry and Wednesday said simultaneously, and the simultaneity of it made Ron laugh and then made Harry laugh, and Wednesday's expression did the not smile that was everything and then some. Dumbledore's reply came on Christmas morning. Harry was sitting in the snow in the courtyard when the owl arrived. He'd been outside since 7, because the castle's Christmas morning had a quality he liked and he'd developed the habit of sitting in it early, before anyone else was around, with tea and Gerald's box and the companionable silence of the grounds. Wednesday was somewhere inside. Ron was absolutely still asleep and would be until noon minimum. The owl landed on his knee and regarded him with the authority of something that knew it carried something important. Harry took the letter. The owl left with the dignity of a completed mission. He opened it. Dear Harry, I read your letter 3 times. I have not done so because I found it difficult to understand. Your clarity of expression is, as always, exceptional, but because each reading revealed something I had missed in the previous one. That is the mark of a letter that was carefully written. I owe you a complete account. I have been composing it for 24 hours. It is attached, 11 pages, and I ask that you read it with the same patience I employed reading yours. I have not selected or omitted. I have given you everything I know about the prophecy, the Horcruxes, the night your parents died, and the reason I made the choices I made. Some of what you will read will confirm what you already know. Some of it will be new. I expect all of it to be unwelcome, and I ask only that you receive it as the honest attempt it is. You asked me to apply to you the respect I ask of others. I have been thinking about that sentence for much of the past 24 hours. I find that I cannot argue with it. I find, further, that my inability to argue with it says something about how I have operated that I am not comfortable with. I am 83 years old. I am not accustomed to being uncomfortable with myself. Your proposal, full information, mutual honesty, you making your own choices with all available data, is the right proposal. I should have offered it. The fact that a 13-year-old boy was required to demand it of me is something I will sit with for a long time. I agree to your terms. I should also tell you that I have begun the process of returning to Hogwarts. Certain members of the board have reconsidered their positions in light of information that was presented to them. I understand that this information originated with you, and that it was given to Professor McGonagall rather than used in any more pointed way. I notice this. I notice the choice it represented. I look forward to continuing our conversation in the new year. I will warn you that I intend to be more forthcoming than you may be entirely prepared for. I have 30 years of information to transmit and I intend, now that I have your permission to be honest, to be comprehensively so. Yours, Albus Dumbledore. P.S. I would very much like to meet Wednesday. Not to understand you better, though I expect I would. Simply because she sounds like someone worth meeting. Harry read the letter twice. He read the postscript 3 times, because the postscript was the most honest part, the part where the strategy fell away and the person showed through, and the person was, in the end, someone with genuine curiosity about genuine people, which was the quality that made him most complicated and most human. He put the letter in his inner pocket next to the journal and sat in the snow with his tea and Gerald's box and the Christmas morning of Hogwarts, which smelled like frost and old stone and the very distant suggestion of something cooking, and he felt the specific satisfaction of having arrived at a place he'd been working toward for a long time. Not an ending. He was 13 and Voldemort had 6 Horcruxes. He'd counted them from the research, and Dumbledore's letter would confirm the number, and the year ahead included Sirius Black and Dementors and an Azkaban breakout that was going to require, among other things, a complete reassessment of everything he'd been told about his father's friends and the night his parents died. He knew this. He was prepared for this. But he was prepared differently than he'd have been prepared without the letter. The letter had changed the geometry of the relationship, from managed to collaborative, from directed to honest. Dumbledore was still Dumbledore and still had 50 years of strategic habit that didn't vanish overnight. But the manipulation required ignorance, and Harry was no longer ignorant, and without the ignorance, the manipulation had nowhere to attach. Wednesday appeared at the courtyard entrance with 2 fresh cups of tea and the specific expression of someone who had slept precisely the amount of sleep she required and was now fully operational. She looked at Harry's face, read it completely in approximately 2 seconds, and came to sit beside him in the snow with the ease of someone who found snow irrelevant. He gave her the letter. She read it once. She handed it back. She took one of the 2 teas for herself and held it with both hands and looked at the castle's winter face. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. "He agreed," she said. "He agreed," Harry said. "Completely, by the sound of it. The 11-page attached account is going to be interesting." "He's not the same problem he was," Wednesday said. "No," Harry said. "He's a different problem now. A better one," Wednesday said. "Problems that can be honestly engaged with are better than ones that require working around." Harry thought about this. About the year ahead and the years beyond it, the Horcruxes that needed finding, the serious situation, the Dementors, the slow-building return of something that should have stayed gone, and somewhere in all of it the moment he already knew was coming when he would stand at the end of something and the choice entry 37 described would be actual and immediate rather than theoretical. He thought about it with the clear-eyed practicality of someone who had been raised by people who looked at terrible things directly and found them manageable. "I'm not afraid of it," he said. The moment at the end. "I'm not afraid." "I know," Wednesday said. "Is that strange?" "No," she said. "You've had 8 years of understanding that the dark is where the interesting things are." She paused. "And you've had 8 years of people who looked at you and saw someone worth looking at. That changes your relationship with your own survival." "You think I want to survive," Harry said. "I think you understand what surviving is for," Wednesday said. "Which is different from just wanting it." She turned to look at him. "You have people. Real ones. Not symbols, not assigned roles, actual people who know who you are." She listed them without sentiment, the way she listed everything: Ron, Hermione, Neville, McGonagall, now Gomez and Morticia and Pugsley. Me. She paused. Even Dumbledore, in whatever the honest version of that relationship becomes. "That's a lot of people," Harry said. "For someone who started in a cupboard," Wednesday said, "it's an enormous number of people." Harry held his tea. The snow was very white and the castle was very old and Gerald turned slowly in his box and somewhere above them an owl crossed the grey-white Christmas sky on its way somewhere specific, which was what owls always did. They didn't wander, they delivered, they moved between places with a purpose that was legible from outside. "Entry 37, he said. "Entry 37, she said. The answer was never death. It was always choice. "I'm going to read Dumbledore's 11 pages, Harry said. "I'll be in the library," Wednesday said. "You found the Hogwarts library?" "Last night," she said. "Madam Pants and I have an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" "The kind where I identified 4 misfiled texts in the first 20 minutes and she gave me access to the restricted section," Wednesday said. She stood, brushing snow from her coat with the efficient precision she applied to all physical tasks. Harry looked up at her. "Wednesday," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "For entry 37. For all of them. For the whole thing. Wednesday regarded him for a moment with the full attention she reserved for things that mattered. She didn't deflect. She didn't minimize. She received the gratitude in the way she did everything, directly and completely. "You did the work," she said. "I just recognized what you were." "What was I?" he said. "Someone worth recognizing," she said, and walked back toward the castle with the unhurried certainty of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Harry sat in the snow for a while longer. He took the journal from his pocket and held it, all 37 entries, 9 years of Friday mornings and Latin declensions and chess games and the fencing room and the map room and the specific warmth of a family that had opened a car door in Surrey and made space. He opened it to entry 37 and read it one more time and thought about choice, about the specific shape of choice when you understood it fully, when you knew what it cost and what it was for and what came after. He thought about Ron, still asleep upstairs, who had said we're going to help with the flat ease of someone for whom the offer was so obvious it barely qualified as a decision. He thought about Hermione, who had been rewriting her relationship with authority since September and would keep rewriting it and would arrive eventually at something stronger than rules, her own judgment, her own standard. He thought about Neville, who was becoming someone specific and formidable in the slow, determined way of people who had been underestimated long enough to understand their own underestimation and had decided to stop accommodating it. He thought about Dumbledore's letter in his pocket and the 11 pages attached to it and the specific admission in it, "I am not accustomed to being uncomfortable with myself," which was the most honest thing he'd heard from a very old man who had spent a very long time being certain. He thought about Voldemort, the thing in the turban, the presence in the diary, the cold dark rush of something that was not death but was what happened when something refused to be finished, and he thought about the Horcruxes and the work ahead and the moment at the end of it, which was real and coming and which he had looked at from every angle and arrived at the same place each time. He was not afraid of it. He was not afraid of anything, or not afraid in the way that paralyzed. He had fear, which was the correct response to genuinely dangerous situations and which he used as information, not as direction. He knew the difference. Wednesday had helped him learn the difference when he was 7 and afraid of the sound Privet Drive made in his memory, and she had said, "Fear is data. Data is useful. Use it." He stood up from the snow. He tucked the journal back into his pocket, over his heart, where it had lived for 8 years. He picked up Gerald's box and held it carefully, and the very elderly spider inside turned once more with the slow authority of something that had been present for more of Harry's life than any other creature and therefore understood things about continuity that were not available through other channels. "Morning," Harry said, to Gerald. Gerald turned. Slow and complete and utterly without urgency. The gesture that had meant "I'm here" since they were both 5 years old. Harry went inside. The castle opened around him in its Christmas morning warmth, the smell of the feast being prepared somewhere below, the portraits stirring as the light came up, a cat crossing the corridor ahead with the private business energy of cats who had places to be. He passed the staircase that led up to Dumbledore's office and thought, later. The 11 pages first. Then the conversation. He passed the library corridor and caught, through the door, the specific silence of Wednesday already at work, surrounded by books, fully occupied, exactly where she wanted to be. He stopped at the door for a moment. Through the narrow gap he could see her at the table, the restricted section text spread around her in a pattern that was not random. She never worked in random, with her head bent over one of them and her pen moving in the margin, and she was completely absorbed in the same way she'd been completely absorbed for as long as he'd known her. Which was the way of people who found the world genuinely interesting and had the capacity to remain interested indefinitely. He didn't go in. She was working. That was enough. He went up to the dormitory and lay on his bed and opened Dumbledore's 11 pages and read them. He read for 2 hours. When he finished he put the pages down and looked at the ceiling of the Gryffindor dormitory with its old stone and its winter light, and he thought about everything he'd read. The prophecy, complete and unedited for the first time. The Horcruxes, there were 6, as he'd calculated, plus Voldemort himself as a 7th. The night his parents died, told from Dumbledore's perspective, with the decisions and the reasons and the guilt that was genuine and the certainty that had survived even the guilt, which said something about certainty that Harry found instructive. His mother's magic, described as Dumbledore understood it, which was less technically detailed than the book Wednesday had given him but more humanly complete, the story of a woman who had chosen, fully informed, of her own will, and in choosing had made something that lasted. He thought about that. The door opened and Ron appeared, enormous and sleep-creased, with his hair doing things that suggested he'd been lying on it in ways physics didn't normally permit. He looked at Harry's face and the papers on the bed and stopped. "Dumbledore," he said. 11 pages, Harry said. "Bad?" "Honest," Harry said. "Which is almost the same thing but not quite." Ron came in and sat on his own bed across from Harry and looked at the papers without reading them. He wouldn't read them, that was private, but he understood them in the way you understood the weight of something without lifting it. "Horcruxes," he said. "You know about them?" "Hermione found the reference last month," Ron said. "She told me. We were going to tell you but, you were waiting to see if I'd gotten there on my own," Harry said. "We knew you had," Ron said. "We were waiting for you to tell us." Harry looked at him. "That's very Wednesday of you," he said. Ron shrugged with the enormous equanimity that was his characteristic mode. "She's been here 2 days and she's already restructuring how I think about things," he said. "It's slightly terrifying." "Is that normal?" "Yes," Harry said. "Great," Ron said. "Right." He stretched. "So. 6 things to destroy before we can actually deal with the main thing. Plus the main thing. All of which we're not doing today." "Not today," Harry said. "Today is Christmas," Ron said. "Today is Christmas," Harry agreed. "So we're going to go eat a frankly excessive amount of food and argue about Quidditch and I'm going to teach your sister to play Exploding Snap, which I know I will immediately regret but I'm committed to the attempt, and you're going to tell Dumbledore you've read his 11 pages and then not think about Horcruxes until January." Harry looked at him. "That's the plan?" "That's the plan," Ron said. "Because the work is going to be there in January and the work is going to be hard and long and honestly slightly frightening if I let myself think about it fully, which I choose not to do on Christmas. And because you've been carrying this for 4 months and you should put it down for one morning." He looked at Harry with the direct, simple certainty that was entirely Ron. "You're allowed to have a morning." Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about deprivation and recovery. About what it meant to actually have, people who understood enough to know when to push and when to give you a morning. About the specific thing that had been building in him since a courtyard in Surrey when he was 5, the thing that Wednesday had begun and the Addams family had grown and Hogwarts had deepened and these people had, without strategy or management, simply continued adding to. "Ron," he said. "Yeah? I'm really glad you were on that train." Ron looked at him with the expression of someone who had been caught by something genuine and was handling it with his characteristic uncurated warmth. "That's extremely sentimental," he said. "I'm pretending you didn't say it." "Fair," Harry said. "But also obviously yes," Ron said. "Come on. Hermione's already in the common room and she has opinions about the breakfast schedule." Harry put Dumbledore's 11 pages in the journal, between entry 36 and entry 37, which felt right, which was what they were, and tucked the journal into his inner pocket and stood up. He looked at the room for a moment. His trunk at the foot of the bed. Gerald's box on the nightstand. The window with its frost and its winter light and the grounds below going white and silent and enormous. The very ordinary extraordinary fact of being here, in this place, in this life, with these people. Not what Dumbledore had planned. Not what the Dursleys would have predicted. Not what anyone looking at that cupboard under the stairs in 1985 could have imagined. Exactly what had been built, carefully and consistently and with genuine love, across 8 years of Fridays and a black journal and a family that opened its doors because Wednesday had found someone interesting and Wednesday was never wrong about people. He went downstairs. The common room was warm and bright, and Hermione was indeed in it with opinions about breakfast, and Ron pushed past Harry immediately to argue about them, and outside the windows of Hogwarts the Christmas morning was doing what Christmas mornings at Hogwarts did, the grounds impossibly white, the lake a dark mirror ringed with ice, the sky a clean winter grey that was already thinking about going blue. Wednesday came down from the library 20 minutes later with a book tucked under one arm and the expression of someone who had found what they were looking for. She sat in the chair by the fire, the best chair, the one with the arm that was the right height, which she had identified and claimed on the first evening without discussion, and opened the book and was immediately somewhere else in the focused way of Wednesday, engaged with something interesting. Harry sat on the hearthrug with his tea and the warmth of the fire and his friends arguing about breakfast beside him and his sister reading above him and the journal in his pocket with its 37 entries full and complete. He picked up Gerald's box from where he'd set it beside the chair. He held it in his lap. Gerald turned once, slowly, with the dignity of an old thing that had been somewhere important for a long time. "Well," Harry said, quietly, just to Gerald, in the language that was only theirs. Gerald turned again. "Here we are," Gerald said, in the way of very old spiders for whom the present moment was the entire point. "Here we are," Harry agreed. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. And he was going to be, not because anyone had managed him into it, not because a prophecy had assigned it, not because the story required it, but because he had looked at the world with clear eyes and found it worth fighting for, and chosen, freely and completely and with full knowledge of what it cost, to be the person who did. That was entry 37. That had always been entry 37.